held the silver fountain pen a fraction of an inch above the final signature line of the foreclosure documents. Across the polished mahogany table, my father stared at me. His hands shook with such force that his platinum cufflinks rattled against the glass surface. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet boardroom. 12 years ago, this man handed me 2 crumpled $20 bills, pushed me out into the freezing autumn rain, and told me he had a new family to focus on. I walked away that night with $40 and built a financial empire. Now he was sitting in my corporate headquarters, seconds away from losing his entire legacy. I looked him dead in the eye, savoring the tense silence, and asked one single question. Was I worth $40 sterling? Before I reveal how this elite family fell right into my trap, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Welcome to Linda Vengeance. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe toxic parents deserve to face the consequences of their actions. My name is Milo Breyer. I am 29 years old. I run a forensic real estate auditing firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. My profession requires a clinical lack of emotion. I spend my days analyzing commercial portfolios, identifying hidden corporate liabilities, and executing quiet acquisitions. I built my life on data, cold logic, and impenetrable boundaries. 72 hours before that boardroom meeting, my boundaries were tested. It was a humid Tuesday morning. The Georgia heat was already baking the asphalt outside, but my home office remained a crisp 68 degrees. The quiet hum of the air conditioning was interrupted by a sharp chime from my desk console. It was the perimeter alert. I shifted my gaze to the secondary monitor. The high-definition security feed displayed the wrought iron gates of my Buckhead compound. I expected a courier delivery. Instead, I saw a ghost from a past I had buried over a decade ago. Sterling and Evelyn stood at my threshold. My pulse did not race. My hands did not clench. I simply leaned forward, studying the live feed with the same detachment I used to audit fraudulent ledgers. My parents looked exactly as I remembered, yet somehow diminished. Sterling stood tall, projecting the stiff posture of an old money socialite, but the high-resolution camera captured a distinct fraying at the edge of his tailored shirt collar. Evelyn wore her signature pearls. A tight, strained smile stretched across her face, pulling at the corners of her mouth, but failing to reach her eyes. They did not look like grieving parents seeking a tearful reconciliation. They held themselves like conquerors, expecting the heavy iron gates to part automatically. I pressed the silver intercom button on my desk. Milo, darling Evelyn spoke first. Her voice carried a practiced, melodic entitlement through the speaker. Open the gate. It is sweltering out here, and the traffic driving down from Alpharetta was dreadful. She offered no greeting. She expressed no hesitation. She spoke as if my secluded estate was merely a forgotten summer home they had decided to visit on a whim. Sterling leaned closer to the camera lens. He checked his reflection in the dark glass before speaking. Let us in, Milo. We have family business to discuss. Have your staff bring some iced tea to the terrace. I let the silence stretch. I listened to the faint sound of cicadas buzzing through the external microphone. Wealthy status-obsessed individuals do not show up unannounced at the home of the son they erased unless their own foundation is cracking. The frayed collar, the uncharacteristic urgency in my father's rigid posture. They needed a lifeline. The gates stay locked, I said. My tone remained flat, stripped of the predictable anger they likely anticipated. Whatever you are selling, Sterling, the market is closed. Sterling dropped his polite facade. His fake smile vanished, replaced by the hard, unforgiving jawline I remembered from my youth. Do not be insolent. We are not here to catch up on old times. Your brother is in the car, and we require your immediate assistance. The mention of my half-brother sparked a flicker of recognition. Julian, the golden child, the primary reason my college fund was drained and my presence in their lives was deemed a liability. I adjusted the camera controls, panning the view to the right. A black luxury sedan idled near the curb, the tinted rear window lowered slowly. A young man stared down at his phone, his face illuminated by the screen, entirely unbothered by the tense standoff occurring 10 feet away. Julian was 22 years old now, cloaked in expensive designer clothes that someone else had paid for. Julian ran into a slight liquidity issue with his new venture. Sterling continued, his voice taking on a demanding edge. "We are here to review your assets. As family, it is your duty to step up and provide the necessary capital." I stared at the monitor. The sheer audacity of his demand hung in the cool air of my office. They had not come to apologize for tossing a 17-year-old boy into the street. They had come to collect the wealth I built without them. By demanding entry to my sanctuary, they had just initiated an audit they could never survive. I released the intercom button and stood up from my leather chair. I walked across the room and stopped in front of a small glass frame hanging on the wall. Inside the frame rested 2 crisp $20 bills. The edges were slightly faded, but the green ink remained sharp. It was the exact money Sterling had thrown at my feet the night he locked me out. My wife Victoria stepped into the office. The soft click of her heels against the hardwood floor announced her arrival. Victoria is a senior corporate litigator. She possesses a brilliant analytical mind shaped by the cutthroat legal battles of Boston. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek, efficient knot. She looked at the security monitor, then at me. "Who is at the gate?" she asked, her voice calm but vigilant. "The people who funded my first real estate investment," I replied, gesturing toward the framed $40. "They are asking for a return on their capital." Victoria walked over to the desk and studied the live feed. Her dark eyes narrowed as she evaluated the posture of the 2 people standing in the heat. "They look desperate," she observed. "Desperate people make careless mistakes. What do they want?" "Sterling claims Julian needs a bailout for a failed startup venture," I explained. "He wants to review our assets. He is framing it as a familial obligation." Victoria let out a short, humorless laugh. She knew my history. She knew the scars I carried and the iron fortress I built to ensure nobody could ever discard me again. "A failed startup," she repeated, tapping a manicured fingernail against the edge of the desk. "People like your father do not drive across town to beg for startup capital. They go to banks for that. They only come to estranged relatives when the banks have already flagged them for fraud." She was right. Victoria always saw the unseen angles. I moved back to the console and pressed the intercom button one more time. "How much of a liquidity issue are we discussing, Sterling?" I asked. Sterling cleared his throat, attempting to regain his authoritative tone. "It is a temporary shortfall. $2 million. We need you to liquidate a minor property to cover the gap. It is a simple family loan." $2 million. The number floated through the speaker. A legitimate tech startup does not accrue a sudden $2 million deficit requiring a cash bailout on a Tuesday morning. That specific amount of urgent debt smelled of illicit gambling offshore syndicates or severe embezzlement. I looked at Victoria. A silent agreement passed between us. We were not going to turn them away and let them scurry back into the shadows. We were going to open the door just wide enough to let them step into a steel trap. "Pull the car onto the driveway," I instructed through the intercom. "You can park near the fountain. You are not coming inside the house. We will speak on the front porch." I hit the gate release. The heavy iron doors groaned as they swung open, granting them access to the perimeter of my estate. Victoria crossed her arms, a predatory sharpness entering her gaze. "I will pull the preliminary background files on Julian while you talk to them," she said. "If they are trying to attach their toxic debt to our firm, I want to know exactly who is holding the leash." I nodded, adjusting the cuffs of my crisp white shirt. I walked out of my office and headed toward the grand foyer. The air conditioning gave way to the heavy, suffocating heat of the Georgia morning as I opened the front door. I stood on the shaded stone porch watching the black sedan crawl up my pristine gravel driveway. Sterling and Evelyn stepped out of the car. Julian followed, dragging his feet, looking around my manicured grounds with a sneer. "Nice place," Julian muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. "A little nouveau riche for my taste, but it will do." I did not react to the insult. I simply categorized it as another piece of evidence. My family had arrived carrying their false entitlement and their hidden sins, fully expecting me to bow. They had no idea they were walking directly into a financial execution. The tires of the luxury sedan crushed the white gravel of my driveway. The sound was sharp in the stifling Georgia heat. Sterling stepped out first, adjusting his suit jacket with a stiff, practiced motion. Evelyn followed, her heels clicking against the stone pavers. Then came the reason I spent my adult life building an impenetrable fortress. Julian kicked his door open. He did not bother to close it. He stood on my pristine driveway, 22 years old, wearing designer sunglasses and a silk shirt unbuttoned past his collarbone. He radiated the lazy entitlement of a man who had never earned a single dollar he spent. Looking at Julian standing in the sunlight, the temperature on the shaded porch seemed to drop. The memory surfaced with vivid clarity. I was 17 years old. The autumn rain was freezing, soaking through my thin jacket. Sterling stood in the warm, dry foyer of their suburban estate. Evelyn stood behind him, cradling a young Julian in her arms. Julian was holding a new, expensive toy. Sterling reached into his leather wallet, pulled out two $20 bills, and shoved them into my chest. He told me they had a new family to focus on, a new legacy to build, and that my presence was a drain on their resources. The heavy oak door slammed shut, leaving me in the dark. I walked 3 miles in the freezing downpour that night. I kept those two damp bills. They were the very same bills currently resting behind glass in my executive office. They served as my daily reminder that biological ties mean nothing without leverage. I stood on the stone porch watching them approach. Julian dragged his feet, looking at the towering columns of my estate with a practiced sneer. He pulled his sunglasses down the bridge of his nose, surveying the manicured lawns and the imported stone fountain. "Nice place," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A little nouveau riche for my taste, but it will do." I did not react. I did not correct his architectural ignorance. I simply catalogued the insult. He was attempting to assert dominance in a space he did not own, projecting a superiority that his current situation clearly contradicted. True wealth is silent. Julian was loud, desperate, and remarkably foolish. Sterling stepped in front of Julian, clearing his throat to command the conversation. "As I mentioned through the intercom, Milo, we are facing a temporary liquidity hurdle. Julian has been developing a proprietary tech platform. It is a brilliant concept, a real disruptor in the market." Sterling paused, wiping a single bead of sweat from his forehead. The Georgia humidity was breaking his composed facade. "However, the development costs exceeded our initial projections. The venture requires an immediate capital injection to stabilize, $2 million. We know your firm handles large asset liquidations. We expect you to liquidate a minor holding and transfer the funds to Julian's operating account by Friday." I let the sheer audacity of his demand settle over the porch. He was not asking for a favor. He was issuing a directive. He discarded me for a fraction of that amount. Yet he felt entirely entitled to demand millions from the empire I built from the ground up. Before I could formulate my response, the heavy mahogany front door opened behind me. Victoria stepped onto the stone porch. My wife is a senior corporate litigator who earned her reputation dismantling hostile takeovers in Boston. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected effortless authority. She did not raise her voice. She did not offer a polite greeting. She simply stood beside me, her dark eyes scanning the 3 people on the driveway with surgical precision. Sterling stiffened, clearly unnerved by her presence. Evelyn offered a tight, wavering smile. "Victoria, dear, how lovely to see you. We are just discussing some family investments." Victoria did not return the smile. She looked at Julian, noting the designer clothes and the nervous energy vibrating underneath his arrogant posture. "A $2 million deficit is not a family investment," Evelyn Victoria stated, her voice smooth and chilling. "That is a catastrophic liability. Tech startups burn through angel funding, not the personal retirement accounts of the founders' parents. Unless, of course, the funds were diverted elsewhere." Julian bristled, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You do not know anything about my business," he snapped, taking a step forward. "The market shifted. We just need a bridge loan. My father said Milo has the cash sitting around." I placed a hand gently on Victoria's arm. The dynamic was clear. Sterling and Evelyn were terrified. Julian was defensive. They were drowning, and they saw my firm as a convenient life raft. If I simply told them no and sent them away, they would continue to scramble, potentially dragging my surname into whatever illicit mess Julian had created. I needed to know exactly who they owed money to. I needed to uncover the anatomy of their ruin. $2 million is a substantial figure, Sterling, I said, my tone remaining clinical and measured. My firm does not issue blind capital injections based on verbal assurances. If you want me to consider restructuring my assets to provide a bridge loan, I require full transparency. Sterling let out a breath, a fleeting look of relief washing over his tense features. He genuinely believed his authoritative tone had worked. He believed I was still the discarded 17-year-old boy desperate for his approval. "Of course," Sterling replied quickly. "We can provide the basic expenditure summaries. Julian has the spreadsheets on his laptop." "Basic summaries are insufficient," I corrected him. "I need unrestricted access to Julian's corporate ledgers, his operating accounts, and the routing numbers for every vendor he claims to owe. You will provide the login credentials to my firm by noon today. I will review the financials personally. If the numbers align, we will discuss the transfer." Julian looked panicked. He opened his mouth to protest, but Sterling shot him a sharp, silencing glare. "You will have the access codes by noon," Milo Sterling promised, attempting to regain his dignified posture. "You will see that it is a solid investment. We appreciate you stepping up to fulfill your duty to this family." I did not offer a farewell. I simply turned around, guiding Victoria back inside the cool, air-conditioned foyer. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, sealing out the stifling heat and the toxic presence of my bloodline. Victoria turned to me, her sharp mind already processing the variables. We both knew legitimate tech founders do not sweat through their silk shirts when asked for standard financial ledgers. I walked straight toward my home office command center. I had just baited the trap. My family thought they were securing a bailout, but they had just handed a forensic auditor the keys to their deepest, darkest secrets. The heavy oak door of my home office clicked shut, sealing out the stifling Georgia heat and the lingering toxicity of my bloodline. My sanctuary was designed for isolation and high-speed data processing. 3 curved monitors illuminated the darkened room, casting a cool blue glow across the polished granite desk. I took my seat, letting the ergonomic leather chair conform to my spine. I glanced at the digital clock on the bottom right corner of my primary screen. It read 11:45. Sterling had promised the financial access codes by noon. He was banking on my supposed familial loyalty to expedite a blind transfer. He severely underestimated the discipline of a forensic real estate auditor. At 11:52, my encrypted inbox chimed. An email arrived from a generic provider containing a single encrypted link and a string of alphanumeric passwords. I did not open the link on my primary network. Doing so could expose my firm to malicious tracking scripts. Instead, I routed the connection through a secure virtual private network, masking my IP address through a server in Switzerland. Only then did I input the credentials. The financial dashboard for Julian's supposed tech venture materialized on my screen. The holding company was registered under a vague moniker, Apex Horizon Solutions. To an untrained observer, the digital ledgers might appear functional. There were line items for server hosting, marketing consultants, and independent contractors. I am not an untrained observer. I build my wealth by hunting anomalies. My fingers moved across the keyboard, exporting the raw data into my proprietary analytical software. Within seconds, the algorithms began stripping away the superficial camouflage. The burn rate of the capital was the first glaring red flag. A legitimate software startup allocates funds systematically, pacing expenditures to match development milestones. Julian's capital vanished in sudden, erratic spikes. I isolated a recurring expenditure listed as back-end database optimization. The payments were being wired to a third-party vendor based in Delaware. I ran a cross-reference on the Delaware entity. It was a shell company registered to a post office box with no physical employees and no digital footprint outside of these specific transactions. The facade was unraveling rapidly. I traced the routing numbers attached to the Delaware shell. The funds did not stay in the United States. Within 24 hours of each deposit, the money was layered through a cryptocurrency mixer and deposited into a holding bank in Antigua. Victoria walked into the office carrying 2 glasses of iced water. She set one near my keyboard and leaned over my shoulder. Her sharp, Boston-trained legal mind immediately recognized the pattern unfolding across the 3 monitors. "That is not tech development," Victoria murmured, her eyes tracking a series of wire transfers that occurred every Sunday evening. "That is classic money laundering." I brought up the final destination of the offshore routing numbers. The algorithms bypassed the superficial banking encryption, revealing the true nature of the receiving accounts. They belonged to an unregulated international sports betting syndicate. Julian did not build a disruptive software platform. He built a catastrophic gambling addiction. He had been placing exorbitant, highly leveraged bets on international sporting events using seed money he likely conned out of our parents. When those initial funds evaporated, he began borrowing on credit from the syndicate. The $2 million deficit was not a business loss. It was a collection marker. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Julian was drowning in illicit debt owed to dangerous, unforgiving creditors. Victoria straightened her posture, her expression hardening into a mask of pure defensive strategy. "Milo, if those creditors trace Julian's financial ties back to your firm, they will try to pierce the corporate veil. Your parents are not asking for a family loan. They are trying to use your clean, highly regulated corporate assets to wash their dirty syndicate debt." The threat was profound. If federal regulators or hostile loan sharks detected a sudden $2 million wire transfer from my pristine accounts to Julian's compromised shell company, my entire empire would be jeopardized. Sterling and Evelyn were willing to sacrifice my life's work, my freedom, and my reputation to shield their golden child from the consequences of his own reckless greed. A distinct sensation blossomed in my chest. It was not panic. It was not sorrow. It was a cold, calculated thrill. For 12 years, I maintained a strict policy of emotional detachment from the people who discarded me. I spent my days dissecting the frauds of strangers, tearing apart fraudulent ledgers for corporate clients. Now, the very architects of my childhood pain had voluntarily handed me the legal justification to dissect them. They walked into my fortress and handed me the scalpel. "We need an ironclad barrier," I said, keeping my gaze locked on the cascading data. "If Sterling attempts to forge a connection between his liabilities and our assets, we need to ensure the blast radius only consumes them." Victoria was already moving. She walked to the secondary workstation in the corner of the office and booted up her legal databases. As a senior litigator, she specialized in severing toxic corporate liabilities. "I am drafting a retroactive indemnification clause right now," Victoria stated, her fingers flying across the keys with lethal precision. "We are instituting strict postnuptial boundaries. I will legally isolate every holding company, every trust, and every real estate portfolio tied to your name. By the time I finish filing these injunctions, your parents will not be able to claim a single paperclip from this estate." Her swift legal maneuvering provided the ultimate defense, but defense alone does not win a war. My parents believed they still held authority over me. They believed their sheer audacity would pressure me into compliance. I needed to shift the power dynamic entirely. I needed to strip away their illusion of control before they even realized the game had changed. I picked up my encrypted mobile device. I bypassed my standard contacts and scrolled to a secured number belonging to a boutique debt broker based in Manhattan. This specific broker specialized in the acquisition of high-risk, distressed paper from shadow markets. I initiated the call. It was answered on the first ring. "I have a target portfolio requiring immediate acquisition," I instructed, my voice low and steady. "It is a $2 million marker held by an Antiguan betting syndicate attached to an individual named Julian Breyer." The broker requested a moment to verify the ledger. I listened to the faint sound of typing on the other end of the line. Victoria paused her own drafting, turning her head to watch me. The corners of her mouth lifted in a subtle, dangerous smile. She understood exactly what I was orchestrating. The marker is active, the broker confirmed. The creditors are highly motivated to liquidate the paper. They are willing to sell the debt for 60 cents on the dollar if we can execute a cash transfer by close of business today. Purchase the entire debt in full, I commanded. Route the transaction through my anonymous proxy holding firm in Wyoming. Ensure the syndicate relinquishes all collection rights to my proxy. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the granite desk. My parents had driven to my estate begging for a savior. They assumed I would either hand over the cash or shut the door, leaving them to face the syndicate alone. They never anticipated a third option. By covertly purchasing the distressed debt through an untraceable proxy, I had just paid off Julian's violent creditors. The offshore syndicate was no longer the threat. I was the threat. I now held the exclusive legal rights to collect the $2 million Julian owed. I was their new invisible master. I leaned back in my chair watching the financial data continue to scroll across the monitors. The trap was set, the defensive walls were raised, and the bait was swallowed. My parents thought they were plotting a clever escape, entirely unaware that Evelyn was already making her next fatal miscalculation by attempting to force my hand in public. The digital ink on the proxy acquisition dried within seconds, effectively transferring Julian's illicit gambling debt into my possession. While I secured the financial perimeter, my mother operated under a profound delusion. Driving away from my estate, Evelyn believed my demand for ledgers was a sign of capitulation. She interpreted my calculated silence as the timid hesitation of a son desperate for parental approval. That erroneous assumption propelled her directly into her chosen battlefield. By early afternoon, the conflict shifted from my sterile home office to the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Buckhead Country Club. This institution represented the beating heart of Atlanta high society. Membership required generational wealth and flawless pedigree. For decades, Evelyn utilized the clubhouse as her personal throne room, wielding gossip like a finely sharpened blade. Today, she intended to use that blade to carve away my wife's reputation. Evelyn hosted a lavish luncheon on the veranda overlooking the 18th hole. The table buzzed with influential women, including several key figures who sat on the same philanthropic boards as Victoria. My mother held a crystal flute of expensive champagne. The sunlight caught the heavy diamond tennis bracelet resting on her wrist, projecting a brilliant illusion of solvency. Yet an observant eye would notice her fingers gripping the delicate stemware tight enough to turn her knuckles pale. Evelyn needed to control the narrative before the truth regarding her imminent bankruptcy leaked. She leaned forward, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper that practically guaranteed every woman at the table would lean in closer. "It is truly heartbreaking," Evelyn murmured, pressing a silk napkin to the corner of her dry eye. "Milo reached out to us this morning. The poor boy is mentally unraveling. He came crawling back, practically begging Sterling to step in and manage his little real estate firm. The pressure has simply broken his fragile mind." The wealthy matrons exchanged wide, scandalized glances. "I worry constantly about his judgment." Evelyn continued, her tone dripping with manufactured pity, "especially with that woman he married. Victoria is so domineering, so unrefined. She isolates him, controlling his every move. Sterling and I are preparing to intervene, perhaps even explore a legal conservatorship to protect the family assets." Across the city, inside our corporate headquarters, Victoria sat at her desk. Her smartphone buzzed, illuminating the screen with a text message from a loyal ally embedded within that very luncheon. The message relayed every venomous syllable Evelyn had uttered. Victoria did not sigh. She did not throw her phone. She slowly placed the device onto her glass desk, her dark eyes narrowing into a lethal, focused stare. My wife grew up navigating the ruthless, cutthroat corridors of Boston elite. She learned early that old money fights dirty, using whispers and social isolation to destroy adversaries. However, Victoria also knew that social armor shatters instantly under the weight of financial reality. Evelyn's cruelty was a transparent projection of her own terror. She was trying to secure her social standing because her bank accounts were draining rapidly to cover Julian's syndicates. Rather than confronting my mother in a public shouting match, Victoria chose a far more sophisticated retaliation. She opened her laptop and accessed the municipal property database. Weeks prior, during a routine evaluation of commercial real estate trends, Victoria noticed a peculiar zoning discrepancy regarding the Buckhead Country Club. The institution had recently completed a lavish expansion of their tennis pavilions. The construction violated several strict environmental ordinances, resulting in staggering municipal fines and severe budget overruns. To conceal the deficit from the membership, the club board quietly secured a high-interest commercial bridge loan from a secondary lender. Victoria pulled up the loan origination documents. The country club was heavily leveraged, teetering on the edge of a severe liquidity crisis. She picked up her phone and dialed the managing director of our firm's acquisitions department. Her instructions were crisp, efficient, and devastating. She authorized the immediate purchase of the country club's outstanding commercial debt portfolio using one of our anonymous holdings subsidiaries. By paying a slight premium, the transaction closed within 2 hours. Victoria effectively became the shadow owner of the institution that gave Evelyn her power. Once the acquisition was finalized, Victoria initiated her countermeasure. As the new primary creditor, she executed an emergency audit of all delinquent member accounts, citing risk management protocols. The club manager, terrified by the sudden change in ownership and desperate to appease the new debt holder, scrambled to comply. The audit revealed exactly what Victoria suspected. Sterling and Evelyn had not paid their exorbitant monthly club dues in over 6 months. Every available dollar they possessed had been funneled into Julian's offshore gambling abyss. The club had previously granted them grace due to their long-standing status. Victoria stripped that grace away. She issued a direct mandate to the club manager. Any account exceeding 90 days of delinquency required an immediate mandatory suspension of privileges effective that very second, with 0 exceptions. Back on the sunlit veranda, the luncheon was reaching its crescendo. Evelyn, emboldened by the sympathetic nods of her peers, decided to cement her fabricated narrative of supreme wealth. She signaled the waiter, a young man wearing a pristine white uniform, and ordered another round of premium vintage champagne for the entire table. "Put it on my member account," Evelyn instructed, waving her platinum card with a practiced dismissive flick of her wrist. The waiter took the card with a polite bow and retreated toward the main bar. The women continued their idle chatter, praising Evelyn for her resilience in dealing with such a supposedly unstable son. Evelyn smiled, soaking in the validation, convinced her social fortress was impenetrable. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not carry a silver tray laden with crystal flutes. He carried a small leather folio, and his expression was tight with extreme discomfort. He approached Evelyn, leaning down to speak softly near her ear. "I am terribly sorry, Mrs. Breyer," the waiter murmured, presenting the folio. The transaction would not process. Evelyn let out a breath of irritation, snatching the folio from his hand. "It is obviously a machine error. Run the card again." "I did try it a second time, ma'am," the waiter replied, his voice wavering slightly. The terminal flashed a hard decline. The conversation at the table ceased. The silence fell over the veranda like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every wealthy socialite stared at the small piece of plastic resting inside the leather book. In their hyper-competitive circle, a declined credit card was the ultimate mark of shame. It was a scarlet letter indicating hidden ruin. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Her strained smile collapsed. "Do not be ridiculous," she hissed, her voice rising in pitch, drawing the attention of neighboring tables. "Bring the manager here, right now." The club manager stepped out from the shadows of the dining room. He did not look apologetic. He looked grim, carrying the weight of the strict mandate Victoria had just enforced. He approached the table, keeping a respectable distance, but his voice carried a firm, unwavering finality. "Mrs. Breyer," the manager stated, ensuring his words were clear enough for the surrounding tables to hear, Your payment cannot be processed because your membership privileges have been suspended. Evelyn stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the stone patio. Suspended. On what grounds? Due to severe prolonged delinquency on your account, the manager explained, his tone clinical and detached. The new Financial Oversight Board mandated an immediate freeze on all accounts carrying balances past 90 days. I am afraid I must ask you to settle the outstanding debt, or I will have to request that you vacate the premises. The humiliation struck Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. The social armor she spent decades polishing shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The influential women sitting at her table averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their linen napkins. The sympathetic murmurs vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating scrutiny. They realized Evelyn was not a wealthy matriarch handling a difficult son. She was a destitute fraud attempting to mask her impending bankruptcy. Evelyn grabbed her designer handbag with shaking fingers. She could not formulate a defense. She could not scream or demand respect because the manager held the undeniable proof of her poverty. The whispers began to ripple across the veranda, a low, buzzing hum of scandalized realization spreading from table to table. She turned and fled. She abandoned her guests, marching stiffly through the clubhouse, her heels clicking a frantic, erratic rhythm against the polished marble floors. Evelyn rushed into the opulent ladies' lounge and locked herself inside a private stall. The pristine walls offered no comfort. She pulled her smartphone from her purse, her hands trembling so fiercely she could barely unlock the screen. Her entire identity had just been incinerated in front of the most judgmental audience possible. She hit the speed dial for Julian. The phone rang 3 times before her golden child answered, his background noise echoing with the chaotic sounds of a crowded street. Julian Evelyn gasped, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her destroyed reputation. They cut off the club accounts. Everyone knows we are out of money. Milo is not helping us. He is stalling. You need to do something right now before we lose everything. On the other end of the line, the reality of their situation finally pierced Julian's arrogant shell. The bridge loan was not coming. His parents were exposed. The syndicate creditors were closing in on him, and the protective umbrella of his family wealth had just collapsed. The line went dead as Julian hung up. Panic consumed him, extinguishing his lazy entitlement. Desperation is a dangerous catalyst. Driven by the terrifying realization that his physical safety was now compromised, Julian abandoned the strategy of begging. He shifted his focus toward a far more reckless avenue, setting his sights on the digital servers housing my proprietary corporate data. The afternoon sun stretched long, sharp shadows across the floor of my home office. The quiet hum of the cooling fans inside my primary server rack provided a steady, rhythmic white noise. I sat before the illuminated monitors, reviewing the final encrypted ledgers from the offshore acquisition. The syndicate debt was safely locked within my anonymous holding firm. The immediate threat of physical danger from the loan sharks had been neutralized, though my family remained oblivious to their rescue. My focus broke when a distinct, high-pitched tone pierced the silence of the room. It was not a standard incoming message notification. It was a Tier 2 security alert. The perimeter of my digital network was under unauthorized external pressure. I set my coffee mug onto the granite desk. My fingers moved to the keyboard, bringing up the firewall diagnostic panel on the center screen. A series of unauthorized login attempts cascaded down the display in rapid succession. Someone was trying to pry open the back door of my secondary client servers. Those specific servers house the proprietary investor lists, the lifeblood of my forensic real estate consultancy. I initiated a trace protocol, watching the incoming data packets bounce through a series of crude virtual private networks. The intruder was trying to mask their location, but their methodology was sloppy, relying on commercially available cloaking software. It took my security algorithm less than 40 seconds to strip away the false internet protocol addresses and pinpoint the true origin of the attack. The signal originated from a luxury high-rise apartment in Midtown Atlanta. The leaseholder on record was Julian Breyer. A harsh, humorless breath escaped my lips. Driven by the frantic, tearful phone call from our mother, Julian had abandoned his strategy of passive entitlement. The bridge loan he anticipated was a phantom, and his creditors were undoubtedly tightening the leash. Desperation breeds recklessness. He needed collateral to present to the syndicate, something valuable enough to buy him another week of breathing room. An elite vetted list of institutional investors and high-net-worth individuals would fetch a premium on the shadow market. I watched the screen as Julian attempted another login variation. He was not utilizing sophisticated hacking algorithms or brute force decryption tools. He was typing in passwords manually, relying on a deeply flawed psychological strategy. He was using variations of an old, shared alphanumeric phrase from our youth. The memory surfaced unbidden but vivid. Before I was discarded during the brief window where we occupied the same sprawling suburban house, the family utilized a central security code for the residential alarm system. It incorporated our father's birth year and the name of Evelyn's prized purebred spaniel. Julian, always too lazy to memorize new sequences, apparently assumed I still clung to that archaic relic of my past. He thought my digital fortress could be compromised by a vestige of the childhood I spent trying to earn their affection. His assumption was deeply insulting, yet it provided a fascinating opportunity. Julian was no longer just a foolish youth drowning in gambling debts. By actively attempting to breach my corporate servers to steal proprietary financial data, he was crossing the threshold into federal wire fraud and cyber espionage. He was handing me the very rope required to hang him in a court of law. I could have blocked his connection with a single keystroke. I could have locked down the network and sent a cease and desist order. But sealing the door teaches a thief nothing. Opening a false door traps them forever. Victoria entered the office carrying a stack of revised postnuptial addendums. She paused, noticing the rapid scrolling of red text reflecting in my eyes. She walked to my side, her gaze tracing the unauthorized login attempts. "Your brother is trying to steal the client roster," Victoria noted, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the tense room. "He is trying to pawn your investors to his bookies. He is using the old residential alarm code." I replied, my fingers hovering over the command terminal. "He thinks I am sentimental." Victoria leaned against the edge of the desk. Her dark eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence. "Do not lock him out. Let him in, but control the environment." I nodded, sharing her strategic vision. I opened a parallel interface and rapidly coded a sandbox server. A sandbox is a secure, isolated testing environment that mimics the appearance of a live network but remains entirely disconnected from actual proprietary data. It is a digital honeypot designed specifically to entrap hostile intruders. Within 4 minutes, I populated the honeypot with a fabricated database. I generated a list of ghost investors, assigning them routing numbers that linked back to dormant, flagged federal accounts. I created spectacular, highly leveraged real estate portfolios that looked incredibly lucrative on paper, but contained zero actual value. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction, a shimmering mirage of wealth tailored to deceive a desperate, inexperienced thief. Once the bait was set, I deliberately weakened the encryption on the sandbox server. I altered the security parameters to accept the archaic password Julian kept hammering into the login prompt. On his 17th attempt, the red text on my screen turned a vibrant, welcoming green. Access granted. I watched the telemetry data as Julian navigated the false server. He moved with frantic, uncoordinated speed. He bypassed the read-only files and went straight for the fabricated master investor list. The download progress bar appeared on my monitor, filling rapidly as he extracted the poisoned data to his local hard drive in Midtown. "He took the bait," I murmured, archiving the intrusion logs, the timestamps, and the exact digital signature. Every footprint he left behind was now secured in an encrypted vault, ready to be presented to a federal magistrate. Victoria tapped her pen against the legal pad in her hands. "He will not hold on to those files. He is terrified. He will forward that list to the syndicate immediately to prove he has high-level collateral." I initiated a tracking script embedded within the downloaded files. The script lay dormant until Julian opened his email client. Just as Victoria predicted, less than 2 minutes after the extraction, Julian attached the fabricated database to an outgoing message. He routed it to an encrypted mail account, the standard communication channel for illicit offshore syndicates. By transmitting stolen corporate data across state lines to an international recipient, Julian cemented his status as a federal criminal. The audit was no longer a mere family dispute. It was a prosecutable offense. I severed his connection, dropping him out of the sandbox and locking the firewall with biometric encryption. The digital silence returned to the office. The cyber attack lasted less than 15 minutes, but the consequences would stretch for decades. "We have the irrefutable proof," I stated, turning my chair to face Victoria. "The wire fraud is documented. The espionage is archived. We hold the debt and the criminal leverage." Victoria crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "Julian is neutralized. But your father does not know that. Sterling sent Julian to execute the bridge loan, and Julian just told him he secured a multi-million-dollar investor list instead." She was correct. The social humiliation at the country club had pushed Evelyn to the brink, and Julian's frantic cyber theft was a symptom of their collective panic. But Sterling was a man who demanded supreme control. The prolonged silence from my end, combined with the lack of an actual cash wire transfer, would rot his patience. He would not wait for Julian to negotiate with shadow creditors. Sterling built his identity on the illusion of sovereign authority. If he could not coerce me into compliance, and if social pressure failed, he would resort to a far more dangerous tactic. He would try to force my hand through legal manipulation. He would attempt to fabricate a claim to the very foundation of my empire, setting the stage for a confrontation that would drag us from the digital shadows straight into the glaring light of the county courthouse. The sunlight reflecting off the Atlanta skyline pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate headquarters. My firm occupied the top 3 levels of a sleek steel and glass high-rise in the financial district. Down on the street, the city moved with a frantic, unrelenting pace. Up here, the environment was strictly regulated. The air smelled of polished mahogany and ozone. Silence was our most valuable commodity. That silence fractured at precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open. Sterling marched across the threshold. He bypassed the front desk, likely utilizing his practiced patrician arrogance to intimidate a junior receptionist into granting him access. He wore a different suit today, a dark navy wool blend, but the aura of desperation clung to him like cheap cologne. He did not come alone. He brought a thick, leather-bound portfolio tucked tightly under his arm. I sat at the head of the long conference table, reviewing the final appraisals for an upcoming commercial real estate acquisition. Victoria stood near the presentation screen, her posture rigid, her dark eyes instantly locking onto my father. We had anticipated retaliation following Julian's failed digital intrusion, but we expected a phone call from a panicked attorney. We did not expect a physical invasion. Sterling reached the center of the room. He did not ask for permission to speak. He slammed the portfolio onto the mahogany surface. The sharp, percussive crack echoed off the glass walls. "We are done playing these childish games," Milo Sterling announced. His voice was loud, straining to project an authority he no longer possessed. "You ignored our requests. You treated your mother with profound disrespect. Now we are handling this like businessmen." I closed my appraisal file. I folded my hands together on the desk. "You broke into my office to lecture me on etiquette, Sterling. That seems like an inefficient use of your afternoon." He sneered, a desperate, ugly twisting of his features. "I am here to claim what rightfully belongs to my family." Sterling flipped the portfolio open. He slid a thick stack of legal parchment across the polished wood. The pages stopped inches from my hands. I looked down. The bold heading across the top page read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement." "I am taking over the management of this firm," Sterling declared, planting his palms on the table and leaning forward. "You owe your entire existence to me. 12 years ago, I did not just kick you out. I provided the foundational capital for your little real estate venture. I gave you $500,000 in seed money. That document proves I retain a 50% equity stake in this company and all its subsidiaries. The sheer audacity of his claim hung in the chilled air. 12 years ago, this man handed me 2 crumpled $20 bills and locked his front door. Now, standing in the shadow of my success, his fragile ego had constructed a spectacular delusion. He could not accept that the 17-year-old boy he discarded had built an empire that dwarfed his own. His mind could not process the fact that he was bankrupt while I was sovereign. To survive the cognitive dissonance, he invented a fiction where he was the secret architect of my wealth. I did not laugh. I did not point out the delusion. I simply looked at the paper. Victoria stepped away from the presentation screen. She walked around the table, her heels clicking a slow, deliberate rhythm. She picked up the forged instrument. Her eyes scanned the text with the lethal efficiency of a senior corporate litigator. A $500,000 seed investment. Victoria murmured, her tone laced with chilling amusement. How generous. It is fully executed and notarized. Sterling puffed his chest, misinterpreting her calm demeanor as submission. It holds up in any court in Georgia. If you do not authorize the $2 million transfer to Julian's account by tomorrow morning, I will execute this trust and seize operational control of your firm. Victoria held the parchment closer to the light filtering through the windows. As a weapon, the forgery was laughably crude. Sterling likely purchased a generic template from a discount legal website. The formatting margins were uneven, standard Arial font replacing the proprietary serif typeface utilized by legitimate Atlanta law firms. But the fatal flaw resided on the final page. Victoria tapped a manicured fingernail against the gold foil sticker near the signature line. The notary stamp, she noted, softly keeping her gaze fixed on the document. It bears an expiration date of next year. A notary commission in this state is only valid for 4 years. If this document was executed 12 years ago, as you claim, this specific seal did not exist. Furthermore, the date of execution listed here was a Sunday. County recording offices do not operate on Sundays. Sterling's face lost a fraction of its color. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight collar. The technicalities do not matter, he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. The signature is there. The intent is clear. It was a desperate pivot. He knew the document was a fake. He manufactured it in a panic after Julian's cyber theft failed. I will file it, Sterling threatened, pointing a shaking finger at me. I know about the Peachtree Complex. The mention of the Peachtree Complex shifted the atmosphere in the room. It was a $50 million commercial acquisition my firm was slated to close by the end of the month. It was the crown jewel of my current portfolio. If I filed this claim of equity with the county clerk, Sterling continued, sensing he had struck a nerve. It triggers an automatic legal hold. The title company will freeze the escrow. Your institutional investors will panic. The entire Peachtree deal will collapse before you can even schedule a hearing to dispute the trust. You will lose tens of millions. Pay the $2 million for Julian or lose your crown jewel. The choice is yours. The threat was a boulder crashing into the center of my strategy. Sterling was leveraging a fraudulent document to initiate a procedural freeze. Even a fake lawsuit requires time to dismiss, and time was the one variable the Peachtree closing lacked. He intended to hold my legitimate business hostage using a piece of fabricated paper. I unclasped my hands. I prepared to instruct my security team to escort him from the premises and draft a cease and desist order. Victoria caught my eye. She gave a microscopic shake of her head. She placed the forged trust back onto the mahogany table. She smoothed the top page with the palm of her hand. You drive a hard bargain, Sterling, Victoria said, her voice smooth and accommodating. We certainly cannot afford to jeopardize the Peachtree acquisition. A prolonged legal dispute would be catastrophic for our investors. Sterling let out a breath he had been holding. A smug, victorious smile spread across his face. He believed he had won. He believed his sheer audacity had conquered my wife's legal brilliance. I knew better. "We need a copy of this agreement for our internal compliance records," Victoria requested, pulling a blank folio from a nearby drawer. "Before we can authorize any capital transfer to Julian, our accounting department must process the equity claim." Sterling eagerly nodded. He separated a duplicate stack of the forged parchment from his leather binder and slid it toward her. "You are making the right choice," Sterling gloated, adjusting his jacket. "Family must protect family. I will expect the transfer confirmation by tomorrow." He turned on his heel and marched out of the boardroom, his posture restored, his ego temporarily inflated by a phantom victory. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him. I looked at Victoria. "Why did you let him leave, thinking he has leverage?" Victoria picked up the duplicate forgery. She slid it into a secure, clear plastic evidence sleeve. "If he merely threatens us with a fake document in private, it is a civil nuisance," she explained, her dark eyes flashing with a predatory brilliance. "But if he walks into the Fulton County Courthouse and officially files this fabricated trust with the clerk to freeze your assets, he crosses a very distinct line." She tapped the plastic sleeve against the mahogany table. "Submitting a forged legal instrument to a government entity to extort funds is a felony. It is severe federal perjury." The brilliance of her maneuver clicked into place. By appearing to submit to his threat, Victoria ensured Sterling would proceed with his plan. She removed the barriers, granting him the confidence to walk directly into a federal trap. We did not need to fight his fake lawsuit. We just needed to let him file it. The trap was set, but desperation is a chaotic catalyst. Sterling and Julian were not content to wait quietly for a wire transfer. Convinced they possessed the ultimate leverage, they decided to apply public pressure. They intended to burn my reputation to the ground to ensure my compliance, setting the stage for a media spectacle that would drag my firm into the unforgiving spotlight. The morning light over the Atlanta skyline usually brought a sense of sharp clarity to my office. Today, it brought ruin. My encrypted smartphone vibrated against the polished granite desk at 6 in the morning, shattering the quiet solitude. A news alert notification illuminated the screen, linking directly to the digital front page of the Atlanta Financial Ledger. It was the most widely read business journal in the Southeast, a publication that could dictate the rise and fall of regional empires. The headline was printed in bold, unforgiving typography. "Family Betrayal, Forensic Auditor Milo Breyer accused of embezzling seed capital." I tapped the link, my jaw tightening, as the text rendered on the screen. The article outlined a fabricated narrative of corporate theft, detailing a pending lawsuit filed in the Fulton County Court. Julian had leaked the forged trust document. He fed the journalist a sensationalized story, claiming my real estate empire was built on stolen family funds and that I was currently freezing my parents out of their rightful equity. The publication even included a scanned, cropped image of the fake signature, obscuring the expired notary flaw just enough to make the document appear legitimate to a casual, uninformed reader. Within 10 minutes, the corporate switchboard began to light up. My chief operating officer sent a secure text asking for guidance on how to manage the incoming press inquiries. I watched the market index futures tick downward on my secondary monitor, knowing the reputational damage would inevitably bleed into our firm valuation. The true cost of my father's desperate gamble materialized at 8:15. The direct private line on my desk rang. It was the lead partner of Vanguard Institutional Holdings, the primary capital anchor for our impending Peachtree acquisition. The conversation was brief and devoid of warmth. Institutional capital is notoriously risk-averse, operating on cold metrics rather than loyalty. The partner did not ask for my side of the story or inquire about the validity of the claims. He simply cited the morality and public relations clause embedded in our preliminary contract. A pending equity dispute involving familial embezzlement presented an unacceptable hazard to their shareholders. The partner formally withdrew their $20 million backing. I hung up the receiver, listening to the dial tone hum a flat, hollow note. The Peachtree deal, the crown jewel I had spent 14 months cultivating, was effectively dead in the water. Without Vanguard acting as the anchor, the remaining syndicate partners would scatter before noon. I stood up and walked to the heavy mahogany door of my office, engaging the brass deadbolt. The click echoed through the empty space. For the first time in 12 years, the walls of my corporate fortress felt like a cage. The exhaustion of fighting a ghost from my past settled deep into my bones, a heavy, suffocating weight that clouded my normally pristine judgment. Victoria unlocked the adjoining executive suite door and stepped inside. She carried a tablet displaying the spiraling media metrics, her expression tight with restrained concern. She noted the severed connection on my phone display and the rigid set of my shoulders. Vanguard pulled out, she stated, a statement of fact rather than a question. I leaned against the edge of the desk, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Yes, they invoked the morality clause. The entire acquisition is collapsing. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. I spent my adult life constructing a flawless reputation, building a name that commanded respect in every boardroom in Georgia. Sterling and Julian were dismantling it with a single, poorly forged lie. A dark, insidious thought crept into my mind, whispering that the cost of fighting this fabricated war was eclipsing the cost of surrender. "We have liquid capital in reserve," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If I wire $2 million to Julian's offshore account today, Sterling withdraws the lawsuit. The media story dies. Vanguard might reconsider once the dust settles. I lose a fraction of my wealth, but I save the firm." Victoria stopped walking. She set her tablet face down on the granite surface. The silence in the room sharpened into a blade. She did not raise her voice. She walked across the carpet and stood directly in front of the small glass frame hanging on the wall. "Look at this, Milo," she commanded softly. I turned my head. The green ink of the currency looked faded under the recessed lighting. The two $20 bills sat perfectly still behind the glass. "When you were 17, your father calculated your exact worth," Victoria said, her Boston accent clipping the consonants with surgical precision. "He decided you were a liability. He handed you pocket change and erased you from his life. You survived because you refused to let them dictate your value. If you pay that ransom today, you are telling Sterling that his initial calculation was correct. You are telling him he still owns you." I stared at the framed bills. The phantom memory of the freezing autumn rain hit me, washing away the corporate fatigue. The cold, analytical predator inside me woke up, banishing the temporary weakness. Paying the extortion would only invite future demands. A parasite does not leave a host simply because it receives a generous meal. It burrows deeper until there is nothing left. "You are right," I replied, my posture straightening. The exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a crystalline focus. We do not negotiate with thieves. We ruin them. To execute the final financial strike, I needed Sterling and Julian to believe their media leak was working. I needed them arrogant, comfortable, and blind to the shifting landscape. I reached for my phone and bypassed the elite public relations firms I typically employed. Instead, I contacted a chaotic, second-rate crisis management agency known for reactive, poorly vetted press releases. I issued specific instructions to their lead publicist. I authorized them to release a panicked, defensive statement denying the allegations, filled with dense legal jargon and desperate deflections. The statement was designed to look like the erratic flailing of a guilty man losing his grip on reality. Victoria monitored the release online. The amateur public relations blast hit the wire within the hour. Julian took the bait immediately. He posted a smug response on his social media channels, hinting at a forthcoming legal victory and celebrating his supposed business acumen. My family watched the media disaster unfold, convinced they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They grew dangerously complacent, drinking champagne in their suburban estate, waiting for my inevitable surrender. While they celebrated their phantom victory, I initiated the real war. My anonymous proxy firm in Wyoming received the green light. I funneled my personal, untraceable capital through a labyrinth of shell companies, effectively masking the origin of the funds. The money crossed international borders, landing securely in the Antiguan banking network. The boutique debt broker in Manhattan finalized the transaction. The offshore sports betting syndicate received their discounted payout. In exchange, they relinquished all collection rights, digital ledgers, and promissory notes associated with Julian's gambling debts. The digital ink dried on the transfer documents, sealing the transaction permanently. I closed the encrypted terminal. The transition of power was complete. My parents thought they held leverage because of a fake lawsuit and a sensationalized news article. They had no idea the ground had shifted beneath their feet. I was no longer an estranged son fending off a media crisis. I was the sole owner of a $2 million illicit debt. I was their most dangerous creditor. The actual syndicate was out of the picture, but Julian did not know that yet. The shadow market operates on strict deadlines and severe intimidation. Julian believed he had 48 hours to deliver the funds to his violent bookies before they initiated physical retaliation. I decided to let that imaginary clock keep ticking. I intended to utilize his mounting terror to orchestrate a public confrontation they could never escape, dragging them out of their suburban hiding place and straight into a highly visible trap. The transition of power was a silent procedure executed through encrypted channels and offshore proxies. I now possessed the lethal leverage Julian feared most, yet he remained entirely ignorant of my new role as his ultimate creditor. It was time to introduce him to the reality of his situation. I sat in my home office, watching the Georgia sun sink lower behind the tree line, casting long shadows across my granite desk. I reached into a locked drawer and retrieved a prepaid cellular device purchased weeks ago for a separate corporate sting operation. It held no connection to my primary network. I accessed a secured geolocation application. Julian was currently occupying a table at a premium midtown espresso bar, likely trying to project an image of unbothered success following his media stunt. My security contractors had placed a discreet tracking tag on his luxury sedan the day he parked on my driveway. I knew his exact coordinates. I typed a brief, calculated message into the burner phone. The text contained no explicit threats of bodily harm. Shadow markets do not operate on crude physical force right away. They operate on the psychological terror of inescapable surveillance. I typed the color of the designer jacket Julian was wearing. I typed the license plate number of the vehicle parked outside the cafe. Then I added the final directive. You have 48 hours to deliver the $2 million. The clock is ticking. I hit send. Across town in the crowded coffee shop, Julian lifted his phone. The notification chimed over the ambient noise of grinding espresso beans and idle chatter. He read the anonymous text. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically around the cafe, searching the faces of strangers for a potential watcher. The smug confidence he had worn since leaking the forged trust evaporated in a single heartbeat. His chest tightened, restricting his breath. He dropped his expensive ceramic cup onto the table, the dark liquid spilling over the edge and staining his shoes. He did not bother to wipe it away. He stumbled out of the chair, his heart hammering against his ribs, and sprinted toward his car. Julian sped back to the suburban estate where Sterling and Evelyn were waiting. They were likely sipping cocktails, expecting my imminent surrender due to the Business Journal article. Instead, Julian burst through their front door, hyperventilating, his eyes wide with genuine terror. He showed them the message. The illusion of their media victory shattered instantly. They realized the fabricated lawsuit and the newspaper headline meant nothing to an underground syndicate demanding immediate payment. The shadow creditors were closing in on them, and their only lifeline was the son they were currently attempting to extort. In my office, the tranquility remained undisturbed. I stood at my drafting table, rolling out a large, textured sheet of architectural blueprints for a new commercial development in downtown Atlanta. The paper smelled of fresh ink and sharp chemical toner. I smoothed the edges down using solid brass weights to hold the corners in place. My private smartphone began to ring. The caller identification displayed my father's number. I did not answer. I let the digital chime echo through the quiet room until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the phone rang again, then a third time, then a fourth. I tapped the screen to play the recorded messages on speaker, keeping my hands free to trace the structural load-bearing walls on the blueprint with a silver drafting pencil. "Milo, please pick up the phone," Evelyn sobbed. Her voice was unrecognizable. The polished, aristocratic tone was replaced by a shrill, frantic pitch. "The people Giuliano owes money to are watching him. They know where he is. You have to send the wire transfer right now. They are going to hurt him. Please, Milo, I am begging you." The next voicemail belonged to Sterling. The commanding patriarch was gone. "Milo, we made a mistake," he choked out, his breathing ragged and uneven. "We can withdraw the lawsuit. We will call the journalist and retract the story. Just liquidate the assets. I will do anything you want. Just save your brother." I listened to their hysteria while maintaining a resting heart rate. For 12 years, I wondered what it would take to break their arrogant facade. I imagined profound apologies or dramatic epiphanies. The truth was far more clinical. It took a simple, anonymous text message from a burner phone to reduce them to weeping beggars. The dramatic irony of the situation provided a deep, fulfilling satisfaction. I was the terrifying shadow figure they were fleeing from, and simultaneously, the savior they were crying out to for rescue. They were begging me to protect them from myself. Victoria entered the room carrying a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. She listened to the third frantic voicemail playing from the speaker. She took a sip of her beverage, her dark eyes reflecting the cool light of the monitors. "They are ready to break," Victoria observed, setting the ceramic mug on the edge of my desk. "The media stunt failed to give them the leverage they needed. Now they are trapped between your corporate silence and the imaginary loan sharks breathing down their necks." I picked up the silver pencil and drew a precise line across the blueprint. It is time to reel them in. I picked up my phone and dialed Sterling's number. He answered on the first ring, gasping into the receiver. "Milo," Sterling cried, his voice trembling. "Thank God. You have to listen to me. We are out of time." Julian received a deadline, 48 hours. I kept my voice smooth, injecting just enough hesitation to make my performance believable. "I reviewed the ledgers you sent, Sterling. The situation is far more perilous than a simple startup failure. You lied to me." "We had to," Sterling pleaded, dropping every ounce of his pride. "We were terrified. If we default on this, we lose everything. Julian could lose his life. Please, Milo, you have the capital. You are the only one who can fix this." I let him endure a few agonizing seconds of silence. I wanted the weight of his dependence to settle deep into his bones. "I cannot authorize a $2 million blind wire transfer based on a phone call," I said slowly, letting reluctance color my words. "The institutional investors require a formal liquidation hearing for a commercial property of that magnitude. We need to sign a binding term sheet in front of witnesses to authorize the release of the funds." "Where do we sign?" Sterling asked frantically. "I will drive to your office right now. I will sign anything." "My office is closed for the evening," I replied. "Victoria and I are attending the Heritage Foundation Charity Gala tonight at the Biltmore Hotel. The entire Atlanta Real Estate Board will be in attendance. If you want this bailout, you and Evelyn will meet me there. Bring Julian. You will sign the term sheet in public acknowledging the debt transfer. If you cause a scene or if you refuse to sign, I walk away and you can explain your deficit to your creditors tomorrow." "We will be there," Sterling promised, his voice thick with desperate relief. "Thank you, Milo. We will do exactly as you say." I ended the call. Victoria raised a single elegant eyebrow. "The Heritage Foundation Gala is the most heavily attended social event of the season," she noted, a dangerous smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Every prominent investor, journalist, and politician in the state will be walking that red carpet." I picked up my silver pencil and returned my focus to the architectural blueprints. "That is exactly the point," I said. "They tried to destroy my reputation in the shadows. They leaked forged documents to the press behind my back. If they want to finalize this transaction, They are going to do it under the brightest chandeliers in the city. I turned away from the drafting table and walked toward the master suite to prepare for the evening. As I selected a bespoke black tuxedo from the cedar-lined closet, I reflected on the irony of the venue. The Biltmore Hotel was the exact location where Sterling had hosted a lavish anniversary party 13 years ago. He had paraded his new family in front of his wealthy peers, leaving me at home to pack my meager belongings. He used that historic ballroom to validate his choices and elevate his social standing. It was only fitting that the same ballroom would now serve as the site of his final humiliation. Victoria emerged from her dressing room wearing a stunning floor-length emerald gown that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin. She fastened a simple diamond clasp around her neck. We did not need to review the plan. Our partnership was forged in the fires of high-stakes corporate litigation, requiring few words to achieve total synchronization. She gathered her sleek evening clutch, dropping a single encrypted flash drive into the silk-lined pocket. The drive contained the irrefutable proof of Julian's wire fraud, the fabricated trust metrics, and the syndicate debt acquisition documents. We walked out to the waiting town car. The Georgia night air was thick and fragrant with the scent of blooming jasmine. As the driver pulled away from my secured gates, heading toward the glittering lights of downtown Atlanta, a profound calm settled over me. The chaotic flailing of my estranged family was about to collide with the cold, unforgiving architecture of truth. The 48-hour deadline I issued as a shadow creditor was merely a catalyst. The real execution would happen tonight beneath crystal chandeliers, where every lie they had ever told would be laid bare for the entire city to witness. The Georgian ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel glowed under the warm light of tiered crystal chandeliers. A jazz quintet played a smooth, syncopated rhythm in the corner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the most cutthroat social arena in the state. Atlanta's power brokers milled about the vast space. Governors, hedge fund managers, and real estate titans exchanged hushed negotiations over silver trays of caviar and vintage champagne. Victoria and I moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Her emerald gown caught the light, drawing admiring glances, while my bespoke black tuxedo served as the standard uniform of the elite. We did not shy away from the scrutiny generated by the morning news article. Hiding implies guilt. We stood in the center of the room, projecting an impenetrable fortress of calm. At 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors at the entrance swung open. Sterling, Evelyn, and Julian stepped onto the polished marble floor. They paused at the threshold, attempting to command the attention of the room. Sterling lifted his chin, projecting the haughty confidence of a victorious monarch. Evelyn wore a rigid smile, her posture stiff. Julian looked frantic. His eyes darted around the ballroom, searching the shadows, his hands trembling as he immediately flagged down a passing waiter to grab a glass of dark liquor. They believed they were arriving to accept my unconditional surrender. They thought the media leak had broken my resolve, and my invitation tonight was a desperate plea for a truce. The dramatic irony tasted better than the expensive wine in my glass. I was not a defeated son begging for mercy. I was the architect of their impending ruin, watching them step onto the scaffold they built themselves. Victoria touched my arm, her gaze tracking Evelyn. "Watch the socialites," she murmured. "The frost is setting in." I followed her line of sight. Evelyn spotted a cluster of influential women near the ice sculpture. These were the same matrons who had witnessed her credit card decline at the Buckhead Country Club luncheon. Evelyn adjusted her diamond necklace, pasted on a vibrant smile, and walked toward them. She expected to be welcomed back into the fold, assuming the newspaper article about my supposed embezzlement proved her wealth was merely tied up in litigation. As Evelyn approached, the lead socialite turned her head. She did not smile. She did not offer a greeting. She simply looked at my mother with a profound, icy disdain, then turned her back entirely. The rest of the group followed suit in perfect, brutal synchronization. They formed a closed circle, physically boxing Evelyn out of their conversation. The rejection was a physical blow. Evelyn halted in her tracks. Her vibrant smile cracked, revealing the raw, unvarnished terror underneath. The rumors of her insolvency had spread through the country club network faster than wildfire. She was no longer a respected matriarch. She was a social pariah, a destitute fraud wearing borrowed diamonds. She retreated toward the safety of her husband, clutching her evening bag like a shield. Sterling ignored his wife's humiliation. He spotted me across the room and charted a direct course. Julian trailed behind him, already finishing his second glass of bourbon. Sterling stopped 3 feet away from me. He planted his feet wide, an archaic display of dominance. He wanted an audience. He raised his voice, ensuring the surrounding hedge fund managers and politicians could hear every word of his performance. Milo Sterling announced, his tone dripping with patronizing benevolence. It takes a big man to admit when he is out of his depth. We are glad you decided to stop this foolish rebellion and do the right thing for your family. I did not flinch. I took a slow sip of my drink. I brought the documents you requested, Sterling. We can finalize the term sheet tonight. Sterling beamed. His chest swelled with unearned pride. He turned slightly, allowing the nearby guests to witness his supposed magnanimity. "We are willing to drop the lawsuit," he declared loudly. "We can forgive the mishandling of the seed capital. We will retract the media statements. All you have to do is sign over the equity and authorize the capital transfer." Family forgives family. The spectators murmured, buying into his theatrical display of fatherly grace. They thought he was saving a prodigal son. They had no idea he was begging a shadow creditor to save him from violent loan sharks. I reached inside the breast pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I was not reaching for a pen. I brushed my thumb against the activation switch of a micro-digital recorder taped to my inner lining. Georgia law requires only one party to consent to an audio recording. I was that party. "I need to clarify the terms before we proceed to the private signing room," I stated, my voice level and clear. "You are offering to withdraw the irrevocable trust document, the exact document you filed with the Fulton County clerk on Tuesday." Sterling nodded eagerly, oblivious to the legal snare closing around his ankles. "Yes, the trust detailing my $500,000 foundational investment in your firm. I will have my attorneys recall the filing the moment the ink is dry on our new agreement." He just confessed to submitting a fraudulent legal instrument to a government entity on tape. The federal perjury charge was now locked and secured. I shifted my focus to my half-brother. Julian was swaying slightly on his feet. The 48-hour deadline I issued via the burner phone was devouring his sanity. The alcohol was failing to numb his mounting panic. He looked at me with a mixture of resentment and extreme desperation. "And the capital transfer," I prompted, directing the question to Julian. "You require $2 million to stabilize your technology platform."
Apex Horizon Solutions.
"Correct," Julian scoffed. He snatched another glass of bourbon from a passing tray.
Stop stalling, Milo. We do not have time for your bureaucratic interrogations. Just sign the paper. My offshore accounts are waiting.
Apex Horizon needs the liquidity by tomorrow morning to finalize our overseas expansion. I tilted my head, feigning mild confusion. Overseas expansion? Your corporate filings indicate a domestic software venture. Why would you require expedited offshore routing? Julian let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. The liquor and the sheer terror of his syndicate deadline eroded his meager remaining filter. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of expensive alcohol and stale cigars. "The shadow market moves fast," Big Brother Julian boasted, attempting to sound like a sophisticated international financier. "You stick to boring domestic real estate. I handle the international web." The Antiguan routing numbers are already prepped. Once your money hits the Delaware Shell Company, my software washes it through the crypto exchange and dumps it into the Caribbean holding account before the regulators even blink. The debt gets paid, everyone walks away happy. Victoria stood perfectly still beside me. Her eyes remained fixed on Julian, cataloging every single syllable of his drunken confession. He had just articulated the exact mechanics of his international money laundering operation. He named the Shell Company. He confirmed the Antiguan destination. He admitted the funds were being used to pay illicit debt rather than fund a legitimate business. The audio file currently writing to my concealed device was a flawless, prosecutable confession. It was the final nail in their federal coffin. "I have heard enough," I said, reaching back into my pocket and deactivating the recorder. Sterling grinned, rubbing his palms together. "Excellent. Let us head up to the VIP lounge and sign the transfer." I checked the platinum watch on my wrist. The VIP lounge is currently occupied by the event organizers. The room will be available in exactly 1 hour. We will meet there to conclude this transaction. Enjoy the caviar while you wait. I offered a curt nod, placed my glass on a passing tray, and turned my back on them. Victoria linked her arm through mine, and we walked away, leaving them stranded in the middle of the ballroom. Sterling watched me leave, his triumphant smile faltering. An hour was an eternity for a man drowning in panic. He needed the signature immediately. He needed the assurance that the money was flowing. He paced near the ice sculpture, ignoring Evelyn's silent tears of social defeat. His eyes scoured the room, searching for any possible leverage to expedite the process. His gaze stopped near the grand staircase. He spotted a young man wearing a poorly tailored suit standing near the bar with a nervous, twitchy energy. He was a junior executive from my firm, an ambitious but highly insecure employee who had been terrified by the morning news article regarding our corporate stability. A treacherous, desperate light flickered in Sterling's eyes. If the son refused to act with haste, perhaps an employee could be persuaded to bypass the security protocols. Sterling straightened his jacket, abandoned his weeping wife and drunken son, and charted a direct path toward the vulnerable executive, setting the stage for a silent internal coup. Sterling operated on a predictable, predatory instinct. When his frontal assault failed to produce immediate results, he retreated to the shadows to seek a vulnerable entry point. From my vantage point near the grand sweeping staircase of the Biltmore Ballroom, I watched him navigate the crowded, glittering space. The jazz quintet played a lively tune, masking the quiet desperation of a man running out of time. His target was Trent, a junior acquisitions manager who had been employed at my firm for exactly 2 years. Trent possessed a sharp, analytical mind for market trends, but sorely lacked the cold, unyielding nerve required for high-stakes forensic warfare. He grew up in a modest, working-class neighborhood in Marietta, constantly scraping for validation among his wealthy, privileged peers. That deep-seated insecurity radiated from him tonight. The morning news article claiming my empire was built on stolen funds had visibly shaken his resolve. He stood near the mahogany bar, gripping a crystal tumbler of scotch, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a hidden exit. Sterling recognized the scent of fear and moved in for the kill. I observed the interaction from a distance, tracing the subtle shifts in their body language while taking a slow sip of my mineral water. Sterling offered a warm, paternal smile, placing a reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. He guided Trent away from the noisy, crowded bar and into a secluded, dimly lit alcove near the coat check. Sterling leaned in close, his posture projecting false confidence. I could not hear the specific words, but the negotiation tactics of desperate men are universal. Sterling was selling an illusion of stability. He undoubtedly leveraged the forged trust document assuring Trent that my downfall was imminent and new management was taking over the firm. Then came the hook. Sterling needed the funds routed to the Caribbean Shell Company before the shadow deadline expired. He needed an insider to bypass my security protocols and initiate a manual wire transfer tonight. In exchange, Sterling offered a king's ransom, targeting the young executive's boundless ambition. The true tragedy of the evening unfolded mere inches away from that shadowy alcove. Julian, fueled by rising panic and top-shelf bourbon, stumbled through the carpeted corridor, searching for a quiet restroom. He paused behind a thick marble pillar, hovering just out of sight. The impeccable acoustics of the arched ceiling carried his father's voice with pristine clarity. Sterling laid out the terms of his treason, confirming his willingness to sacrifice his own blood. "Julian lacks the discipline required for corporate leadership," Sterling whispered, his tone dripping with cold, calculated pragmatism. "The boy is a liability. Once I hold the reins of this firm, I need a hungry, capable partner. You bypass my ungrateful son and process this transfer, Trent and I will hand you Julian's intended equity share. You will be my second in command." Julian leaned against the cold stone pillar, the blood draining from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale hue. The amber liquor sloshed over the rim of his heavy crystal glass, staining his expensive silk cuffs. The golden child illusion shattered into jagged, irreparable shards. For his entire life, Julian believed he was the prized heir, the chosen son favored over the discarded teenager they tossed into the freezing rain. He believed the designer clothes and the luxury cars were symbols of unconditional love. In reality, he was nothing but a pawn on a chessboard. His father was selling his future to a stranger to save his own skin. The familial bond fractured in the shadows of the ballroom, leaving Julian hollow. His chest burned with the dark, suffocating betrayal. He did not step out to confront them. He turned around and walked back toward the main hall, his eyes hardening into a bitter, silent rage that would fuel the impending destruction. Inside the alcove, the treacherous deal concluded. Trent nodded eagerly, his posture straightening as he swallowed the intoxicating promise of unearned power. He left Sterling waiting by the cloakroom and headed swiftly toward the private service corridors. He intended to access the secure underground parking garage, retrieve his encrypted corporate laptop, and initiate the fraudulent transfer from the presumed safety of his vehicle. He pressed the call button for the private service elevator. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, melodic chime. I was standing inside. Trent froze, his breath hitched audibly in his throat. The faint flush of excitement vanished from his cheeks. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a primal terror resembling prey caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming train. He instinctively took a half step backward, but the corridor offered no escape. "Get in, Trent," I instructed, my voice level and dangerously calm. He stepped into the metal box on trembling legs. The heavy steel doors closed, sealing us inside the descending cage. The mechanical hum of the elevator provided a steady, rhythmic soundtrack to his impending ruin. He opened his mouth, likely to formulate a frantic lie regarding his conversation with Sterling or invent a sudden excuse for leaving the gala early. I did not afford him the opportunity to speak. "You access the preliminary transfer protocols on your mobile device at 9:14, I stated, keeping my gaze locked on his terrified, sweating face. You queried the routing limits for international transactions. You did this while standing in the coat-check alcove with a man who holds zero equity in my company." Trent pressed his back against the cold steel wall. His hands shook uncontrollably at his sides. He realized the fatal flaw in his blind ambition. He forgot who built the digital architecture of the firm. I own the servers. I monitor every keystroke, every query, and every single data packet transmitted across my network. The illusion of secrecy was a trap I designed to catch disloyal elements. "Milo, I can explain," Trent stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "He told me the firm was collapsing. He showed me the trust documents on his phone. I thought I was protecting my career. I panicked." I stepped closer, invading his personal space, letting the chilled air of the elevator heighten his extreme discomfort. "You thought you were securing a shortcut to the executive board. You let a bankrupt, desperate fraud convince you to commit corporate treason. You traded your integrity for a phantom promotion offered by a man who cannot even afford his own country club dues." "Please, Trent," pleaded a bead of sweat tracing a slow path down his temple. "Do not fire me. Do not press charges. I will pack my desk tonight. I will disappear. I swear it." The elevator chimed, signaling our arrival at the subterranean parking level. The doors slid open, revealing the dim concrete expanse illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. I did not move to exit. I pressed the control button to hold the doors open, trapping him inside a moment longer. "I am not firing you," I replied, my tone devoid of mercy or warmth. "Firing you provides my father with an excuse for his failure. I prefer to let him drown in his own arrogant certainty. You are going to send a message." I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket and retrieved a small, folded piece of thick stationery. I handed it to the trembling junior executive. Trent unfolded the paper with clumsy fingers. Written in stark black ink was a sequence of alphanumeric characters. Those are fabricated routing confirmation codes, I explained, watching his eyes scan the numbers. They perfectly mimic the digital signature of a cleared international wire transfer. You are going to pull out your phone right now. You will text those exact codes to Sterling. You will assure him the funds have been successfully routed to the Antiguan holding account. You will tell him his shadow debt is paid in full. Trent stared at the paper, his mind struggling to process the bizarre command. You want him to think he won. You want him to believe the theft was successful. I want him to walk into my boardroom tomorrow morning believing he holds the world in his hands. I corrected him, stepping back to afford him space to breathe. Send the text. Trent fumbled in his trouser pocket, withdrawing his smartphone. His thumbs shook as he typed the false confirmation sequence into a new encrypted message. He hit send, holding the screen up to provide visual proof of the transmission. The digital arrow turned blue, indicating delivery. The trap snapped shut with finality. Go home, Trent, I ordered, releasing the hold button on the elevator panel. Your employment status will be evaluated after the dust settles on this entire affair. If you speak a single word of this interaction to anyone, I will ensure you never work in the financial sector again. You will be blacklisted across the entire state of Georgia. Trent stumbled out of the elevator, gasping for air in the humid garage, as if he had been holding his breath for hours. The steel doors closed, carrying me back up to the glittering, noisy ballroom. Upstairs, near the cloakroom, a distinct notification chimed in Sterling's pocket. He retrieved his device, his eyes eagerly scanning the fabricated confirmation codes glowing on the screen. A profound, undeniable relief washed over his aging features. His posture swelled with triumphant, unearned pride. He believed he had successfully outmaneuvered me by compromising my staff. He believed his brilliant manipulation had secured his safety and cemented his ultimate victory over the son he discarded. Armed with fake numbers and a false sense of supremacy, he prepared for the final boardroom meeting, walking blindly toward the edge of a sheer cliff, entirely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was already gone. The morning sun crested the Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete geometry of the financial district. Miles away in the affluent suburbs, Sterling and Evelyn were likely raising crystal glasses filled with vintage mimosa, toasting their imagined triumph. Julian was probably sleeping off his bourbon haze, resting easy under the delusion that his shadow debt was erased by a corrupt junior executive. They believed their late-night coercion had secured their legacy and insulated them from consequence. While they celebrated a phantom victory, Victoria and I navigated the sterile, echoing corridors of the Richard Russell Federal Building. The transition from a civil dispute to a severe criminal investigation operates without fanfare. There are no dramatic speeches or swelling orchestral scores. The machinery of federal justice moves with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency that strips away all pretense of social standing. We bypassed the public galleries and utilized a secured elevator ascending to a windowless briefing room reserved for the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We sat across a battered metal table from Special Agent Caldwell, a seasoned investigator who had built a career dismantling corporate syndicates, alongside a senior regulator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The air in the room smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and floor wax. It was an environment designed to strip away illusions. Victoria placed a thick black bound dossier onto the center of the table. The heavy leather cover landed with a dull, resonant thud. My wife grew up in the austere, demanding environment of a prominent Boston legal family. She learned early that courtroom theater is useless without an impenetrable foundation of verified data. She did not raise her voice to convey the severity of the crimes. She simply opened the binder, her dark eyes locking onto the investigators with lethal precision. The documents contained within this portfolio outline a coordinated, multi-tiered effort to defraud my husband of his corporate assets. Victoria stated, her tone crisp and professional. The perpetrators have utilized forged legal instruments, attempted cyber espionage, and admitted to international money laundering. The evidence is categorized, verified, and chained. Agent Caldwell opened the first tab. The crisp white pages detailed the fraudulent, irrevocable trust Sterling had boldly filed with the Fulton County clerk. Victoria guided the agent through the specific anomalies. She pointed out the expired notary seal, the improper typographical formatting, and the impossible Sunday execution date. Filing a fabricated document with a government entity to extort funds is a severe federal offense. Sterling assumed the county clerk would merely stamp the paper and file it away into a dusty archive, granting him the leverage to freeze my upcoming commercial acquisition. He failed to realize that using the court system to perpetrate a fraud triggered automatic federal perjury statutes. The SEC regulator turned to the second tab. This section contained the digital telemetry from the sandbox server intrusion. The pages displayed rows of green text outlining the exact Internet protocol addresses, the archaic password variations, and the timestamps of the data extraction. Julian executed a targeted cyber attack against our secondary client servers, I explained, keeping my voice devoid of personal grievance. He accessed a digital honeypot and downloaded a fabricated list of institutional investors. He immediately transmitted that proprietary data across state lines to an encrypted email account associated with an illicit gambling syndicate. Agent Caldwell traced the routing numbers with a silver pen. He recognized the offshore encryption patterns immediately. The digital footprint was indisputable. Julian had not just stolen data, he had weaponized it to secure an extension on an illegal debt, crossing multiple jurisdictional lines in the process. The final piece of evidence did not require reading. I retrieved the micro-digital recorder from my jacket pocket and placed it on the metal table. I pressed play. The pristine acoustics of the Biltmore Hotel ballroom filled the small, windowless briefing room. The jazz quintet played softly in the background, providing a surreal soundtrack to my half-brother's drunken arrogance. Julian's voice echoed off the cinder-block walls, bragging about his international web. The recording captured him detailing the exact mechanics of his laundering operation. He named the Delaware Shell Company. He confirmed the Antiguan holding account destination. He explicitly stated the funds were intended to pay off shadow market debts. The recording clicked off, plunging the room back into a heavy silence. Agent Caldwell closed the black binder. He did not express shock or offer sympathetic platitudes regarding the betrayal of my bloodline. He viewed my family through the lens of a predator, recognizing wounded, careless prey. The chain of custody is pristine, the agent noted, tapping the leather cover. The audio confession corroborates the digital intrusion logs and the financial routing data. Any magistrate in this circuit will sign these warrants before their morning coffee gets cold. Victoria reached into her sleek briefcase and withdrew a final single sheet of heavy parchment. She slid it across the table toward me. It was a sworn legal affidavit. The document formally severed my ties to Sterling Evelyn and Julian, relinquishing any future claims to their estate and explicitly designating them as hostile entities to my corporate holdings. Signing this paper meant there was no turning back. It was the irreversible threshold. Once the federal gears began to turn, I could not call them off. My family would face the full, unforgiving weight of the United States justice system. I looked at the pen resting beside the document. For 12 years, I had built my empire in the shadow of their rejection. I had structured my entire existence to prove that the $40 they gave me was a catastrophic miscalculation. A tiny, irrational fraction of my mind wondered if this final strike was necessary, if stripping them of their wealth and their freedom was a step too far. I looked up and met Victoria's gaze. Her expression offered no pressure, only unwavering, silent support. She understood the profound weight of excising a toxic bloodline. She knew that showing mercy to a parasite only guarantees your own destruction. Sterling and Julian had not hesitated when they tried to burn my reputation in the press. They had not hesitated when they tried to steal my proprietary data. They would bleed my firm dry and step over the wreckage without a second thought. I picked up the pen. The ink flowed smoothly across the signature line. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for over a decade evaporated, replaced by a profound, hollow sense of closure. The affidavit was handed to the federal agents. Within 45 minutes, the bureaucratic machinery delivered its payload. A federal magistrate judge reviewed the pristine dossier and found undeniable probable cause. The judge signed a stack of immediate seizure warrants. The trap sprang shut in the digital realm first. Federal holds were placed on the Antiguan routing numbers, freezing the offshore accounts before Julian could even attempt to transfer his imaginary funds. The warrants extended to Sterling's domestic assets. Electronic locks were applied to their personal banking ledgers, their retirement portfolios, and the deed to their sprawling suburban estate. Sterling and Evelyn were currently sipping their morning coffee, entirely oblivious to the fact that they no longer owned the cups in their hands, the house surrounding them, or the cars parked in their driveway. We scheduled the execution of the physical warrants for 10 o'clock. I stood up from the metal table and buttoned my suit jacket. The civil warfare was over. My family had spent the past week trying to outmaneuver me with forged documents and back-channel bribes. They thought they were playing a high-stakes game of corporate chess. They failed to realize I had flipped the board days ago. We walked out of the federal building and stepped into the warming Georgia air. Our driver held the door to the waiting town car. The destination was my corporate headquarters in Buckhead. Sterling had demanded a final boardroom meeting to sign the term sheet and execute the phantom bailout. He believed his secret midnight negotiation with the junior executive had guaranteed his victory. He believed he was walking into my office to claim his rightful throne and secure the $2 million transfer. He was walking into a glass cage. The dramatic irony hung heavy in the air, a silent storm gathering on the horizon. I looked forward to sitting at the head of the mahogany table, watching the smug certainty melt from his face when he realized the money was gone, the doors were locked, and the federal agents were already waiting in the lobby. The journey back to the Buckhead Financial District took exactly 14 minutes. My driver navigated the morning traffic with practiced efficiency, pulling the town car seamlessly into the subterranean parking garage beneath my corporate headquarters. Victoria and I stepped out into the cool, shadowed concrete expanse. We did not exchange a single word. Our strategy required no further rehearsal. The federal warrants were signed. The offshore accounts were frozen. The trap was armed and waiting for the prey to step onto the trigger. We ascended in the private executive elevator. The polished steel doors slid open on the top floor, revealing the pristine, quiet domain of my empire. The reception area remained empty. I had dismissed the front desk staff for the morning, ensuring there would be no collateral witnesses to the impending destruction. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and sharp ozone from the server racks humming behind secure doors. We entered the main boardroom. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the heavy mahogany conference table. I took my position at the head of the table. Victoria stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the sprawling Atlanta skyline. She held a single, thick, blue-bound portfolio. At precisely 10 o'clock, the secondary elevator chimed in the lobby. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Sterling crossed the threshold first, radiating an unbearable, suffocating arrogance. He wore a freshly pressed silver suit, projecting the image of a seasoned conqueror returning to claim his spoils. Evelyn trailed right beside him. Her social humiliation at the country club seemed temporarily forgotten. She carried a new designer handbag and wore an expression of haughty triumph, believing the fabricated text messages had restored her throne. Julian brought up the rear. The frantic terror that gripped him at the charity gala had evaporated. He walked with a loose, lazy stride, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed his severe hangover, but a smug smirk stretched across his face. He thought he had outsmarted the shadow market. He believed his father had orchestrated a brilliant coup, utilizing a corrupt junior employee to execute a shadow wire transfer and erase the crushing syndicate debt. They fanned out across the opposite end of the mahogany table, positioning themselves like a rival board of directors preparing to accept my resignation. "Good morning," Milo Sterling announced, his voice booming through the cavernous room. He did not bother to ask for permission to sit. He remained standing, leaning forward, placing his knuckles on the polished wood. "We are here to finalize the transition. The term sheet needs your signature, and we require the physical confirmation receipts to close out our internal ledgers." I did not reply. I kept my hands folded neatly on the desk, my posture relaxed. Silence is a weapon most people cannot wield. In a negotiation, the lesser party always rushes to fill the quiet void, eager to assert dominance or seek validation. I let the silence stretch, forcing Sterling to listen to the faint ticking of my platinum watch and the hum of the climate control system. Sterling's arrogant smile twitched. He glanced around the empty room, his eyes scanning the frosted glass partitions. "Where is Trent?" he demanded, a hint of irritation coloring his tone. "He assured me last night the preliminary routing was authorized. We need him to print the final Swift codes before we leave. Bring him in here. Your junior executive is no longer on the premises." I stated, my voice low and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "He vacated the building late last night. He will not be returning." Sterling let out a short, dismissive scoff. He assumed Trent had simply fled out of cowardice after completing the illicit task. "That is irrelevant. He did his job." He texted me the alphanumeric confirmation sequence. "The funds are currently pending deposit in Julian's offshore account. The leverage is secured. Now we are simply executing the formalities. Sign the equity transfer and we will depart." He reached into his breast pocket and tossed a cheap plastic pen onto the table. It clattered against the wood, rolling to a stop near my folded hands. "You continue to operate under a fascinating delusion, Sterling," I observed, leaving the pen untouched. "You walked into my fortress, attempted to bribe my staff, filed forged documents in a county courthouse, and believed you could dictate the terms of your own surrender. You assume the text message you received last night was a victory bell. It was merely a dinner bell." Evelyn crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking together. "Stop speaking in riddles, Milo. Your father outmaneuvered you. You thought you could freeze us out, but we took what rightfully belongs to us. Just hand over the paperwork so Julian can finalize his business expansion." I shifted my gaze to Julian. He was leaning against the leather chair, looking incredibly bored. He wanted the meeting to end so he could return to his life of unearned luxury. He had zero comprehension of the sheer cliff edge he was currently standing upon. Victoria stepped away from the window. The sunlight caught the sleek lines of her charcoal suit. She moved with the predatory grace of an apex litigator preparing to deliver a fatal blow. She approached the table and placed the thick, blue-bound portfolio directly in the center of the mahogany expanse. "Here are the final documents regarding your requested capital transfer," Victoria announced, her Boston accent slicing through the tension like a razor. "Every single ledger, routing number, and ownership detail is cataloged within these pages. Review them carefully." Julian did not wait for his father. His greed overriding his limited patience, he lunged forward and snatched the blue portfolio off the table. He flipped the heavy cover open, fully expecting to see a printed confirmation of a $2 million wire transfer destined for his Antiguan shell company. He expected to see salvation. I watched his eyes as they scanned the first page. The atmospheric pressure inside the boardroom shifted. The temperature seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. The smug, lazy smirk melted off Julian's face, replaced by a hollow, slack-jawed stare. His pupils dilated, his breathing hitched, freezing in his chest. "What is it?" Sterling snapped, irritated by his son's sudden paralysis. "Give me the confirmation codes. Let us finish this." Julian did not hand the portfolio over. His fingers gripped the edges of the paper so tightly, his knuckles turned a stark, bony white. The document he was reading bore no resemblance to a banking transfer. It was not a receipt. It was a comprehensive, painstakingly detailed forensic audit. The opening pages explicitly traced his initial fraudulent seed capital. The subsequent paragraphs outlined the exact mechanism of his offshore money laundering, identifying the Delaware Shell Corporation by name. But the true horror, the realization that paralyzed his vocal cords, resided in the final section of the document. Julian was staring at the legal acquisition papers for his shadow debt. He was reading the precise contractual language proving that a Wyoming proxy firm had purchased his $2 million syndicate marker in full. He was looking at the undeniable certified proof that the violent loan sharks he feared were no longer holding his leash. I was holding his leash. Sterling, growing frantic by the heavy, suffocating silence, ripped the blue folder out of Julian's frozen hands. He stared at the pages, his eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal text. His mind struggled to process the information. He looked for the wire transfer receipt, but found only evidence of his son's criminal enterprise and a debt acquisition notice bearing my proxy signature. "What is this?" Sterling whispered, his voice cracking, the booming authority vanishing into thin air. "Where are the transfer codes Trent sent me? Where is the money?" "There is no money, Sterling," I replied, rising slowly from my leather chair. I stood at my full height, towering over the ruins of their false empire. The alphanumeric codes you received last night were fabricated. I stood in the elevator with your bribed executive and forced him to type that message. You did not outsmart anyone. You merely accepted the bait I offered. The reality of their situation crashed down upon them, a suffocating tidal wave of inescapable doom. They were standing in my boardroom, having confessed their crimes on audio, having filed forged documents with a government clerk, and having inadvertently handed their entire illicit debt portfolio directly to me. The trap was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was illuminated by the morning sun surrounding them on all sides. The glass walls of the boardroom offered a panoramic view of the city, but they provided zero avenues for escape. The final, devastating blow was yet to be struck, as the true cost of their fabricated lawsuit was about to claim the one asset they cherished most. The thick blue portfolio slipped from Julian's hands. It hit the polished mahogany surface with a heavy, definitive thud. The sudden sound shattered the tense quiet of the boardroom. The meticulously organized pages fanned out across the table, exposing the undeniable proof of his offshore money laundering and the certified debt acquisition documents. Julian did not try to gather the scattered papers. He took a staggering step backward, distancing himself from the evidence, as if the ink itself were toxic. His breath hitched in his throat, creating a harsh, scraping noise. The arrogant, lazy demeanor he carried into my headquarters vanished, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed stare of a man staring into an open grave. The color drained from his face so rapidly, his skin took on the sickly hue of old parchment. Sterling leaned forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He did not understand his son's physical reaction. He reached across the table, his fingers grazing the edge of the official audit. "What is this?" Sterling demanded, his voice thick with rising panic. "Where are the wire transfer codes? Trent promised the funds were routed to Antigua." Julian could not speak. His vocal cords seemed paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the trap he had stumbled into. He simply shook his head, a slow, mechanical movement, conveying total defeat. Sterling snatched the top pages from the table, bringing them close to his face. He read the headings. He saw the forensic breakdown of the Delaware Shell Company. He traced the digital footprint linking his son to the illegal sports betting syndicates. Then his eyes landed on the final section. It was the legal assignment of claim. The document clearly outlined that an anonymous proxy firm based in Wyoming had purchased the $2 million illicit marker in its entirety. The shadow creditors were no longer involved. The syndicate had relinquished all collection rights, transferring the debt to a new single entity. Sterling read the signature authorizing the acquisition. He read my name. His hands began to shake. The trembling started in his fingers and quickly spread to his wrists, causing the heavy parchment to flutter in his grasp. He looked up, his gaze locking onto mine. The arrogant patriarch illusion disintegrated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered imposter. "You bought the debt," Sterling whispered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of the revelation. I remained seated at the head of the table, my posture relaxed, projecting an aura of impenetrable control. I did not raise my voice to match his panic. I kept my tone even, ensuring every syllable landed with surgical precision. "The shadow market is incredibly efficient," Sterling I explained, watching a bead of sweat trace a slow path down his temple. Creditors holding high-risk illicit paper are always eager to liquidate their liabilities for a guaranteed cash payout. I contacted a boutique broker in Manhattan while you were sitting in your suburban living room. I authorized the purchase of Julian's gambling markers using my own untraceable capital. Evelyn gasped, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. Her diamond tennis bracelet clinked against her teeth. She looked at Julianne, desperate for a denial, but Julianne remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You set us up," Sterling choked out, the reality of the past week finally aligning in his mind. The media leak, the delay tactics. You wanted us to think we were winning. "You set yourselves up," I corrected him, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "You walked into my fortress and demanded millions. You attempted to bribe my staff. You leaked a sensationalized story to the press, hoping to force my hand through public humiliation. You relied on intimidation and theft. I merely stepped out of your way and allowed your own desperate momentum to carry you over the edge." I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to digest the profound, dramatic irony of their situation. Every aggressive maneuver they executed over the past week was a carefully orchestrated step in my design. They thought they were hunting me. They were simply following the trail of breadcrumbs I laid out, leading them directly into this inescapable glass cage. "You are not leaving this building with a bailout." I stated the finality of my words echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You are leaving this building owing me $2 million. I am your sole creditor. The violent loan sharks you feared are no longer a threat. I am the threat." Sterling dropped the papers. They fluttered back down to the mahogany table, settling over the scattered audit like a shroud. His breathing became erratic, his chest heaving under his tailored silver suit. He tried to formulate a strategy, his eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. Victoria stood near the presentation screen, her dark eyes observing the systematic destruction of their false empire. She offered no sympathetic gestures. She stood as a silent sentinel of justice, watching the poison drain from the family tree. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor commanded their immediate attention. I did not walk toward them. I turned my back on the terrified trio and walked toward the display wall on the far side of the boardroom. Recessed lighting illuminated a small, reinforced glass frame hanging at eye level. Inside the frame rested the 2 crumpled $20 bills from 12 years ago. The green ink appeared dull, a stark contrast to the sleek, modern architecture surrounding it. I stared at the currency, allowing the memory of that freezing autumn night to wash over me one final time. I remembered the smell of the damp asphalt. I remembered the heavy oak door slamming shut, severing my ties to the only life I knew. I remembered the profound hollow ache in my chest, a void I eventually filled with cold logic and relentless ambition. Sterling had handed me that money with a sneer, calculating my exact worth and finding it lacking. He discarded me to pave the way for his golden child. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass paperweight resting on the nearby credenza. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Sterling, Evelyn, and Julian watched my every movement, paralyzed by the shifting power dynamic. They did not understand the significance of the framed currency. They only knew they were entirely at my mercy. I raised the solid brass object and drove it forward. The impact shattered the reinforced glass. The sharp, violent sound of breaking glass fractured the heavy tension in the room. Tiny shards rained down, scattering across the polished floor like crushed diamonds. I ignored the falling debris. I reached into the broken frame and retrieved the 2 $20 bills. The paper felt dry and brittle against my fingertips. It carried no warmth, only the cold resonance of a long overdue reckoning. I turned around and walked back to the head of the mahogany table. My family shrank back as I approached, their postures crumbling under the undeniable weight of their defeat. I stopped directly in front of Sterling. I looked into his eyes, searching for the arrogant patriarch who once banished me into the rain. I found only a hollow, terrified shell. I raised my hand and placed the $40 onto the table. The bills landed with a soft, definitive snap against the wood, coming to rest right on top of the forensic audit outlining their ruin. "You sold my future for $40 sterling," I stated, my voice stripped of all emotion, a hollow vessel delivering a fatal verdict. Today, I bought your entire legacy for $2 million. Sterling stared at the crumpled bills. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words that refused to materialize. The dramatic irony reached its absolute peak. He had traded his capable son for pocket change, investing his entire fortune into a golden child who ultimately orchestrated his downfall. He traded an empire for dust. Evelyn began to weep, a quiet, pathetic sound that offered zero comfort. She recognized the finality of the transaction. They were financially destitute, indebted to the very son they tried to destroy. They had nothing left to leverage, no social standing to weaponize, and no hidden funds to orchestrate an escape. But Sterling possessed a dangerous, reckless stubbornness. He built his identity on the illusion of supreme control. Confronted with the undeniable proof of his ruin, his mind fractured. He could not accept total defeat. He refused to acknowledge that his brilliant schemes were merely the desperate flailings of a trapped animal. His eyes tore away from the $40 and locked onto my face. A desperate, treacherous light flickered in his gaze. He remembered the one remaining weapon he brought into this war. He remembered the forged trust document he boldly filed with the Fulton County clerk. He believed that single piece of fabricated paper still granted him the power to freeze my commercial acquisitions. He believed he still held a trigger. He reached into his leather briefcase, his hands shaking as he prepared to launch his final, fatal counterattack, entirely unaware that Victoria was waiting to drop the federal guillotine directly onto his neck. Sterling plunged his hand into his leather briefcase. The brass zipper snagged against the fabric, emitting a sharp, metallic scrape that betrayed his frantic state of mind. He yanked the tab, tearing the fine stitching, and retrieved a duplicate copy of the forged irrevocable trust. He threw the heavy parchment onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood, coming to a halt mere inches from the two faded $20 bills. "You think acquiring a shadow debt makes you a king?" Sterling spat, his voice regaining a ragged, desperate volume. "You are forgetting who holds the equity in this firm. I filed this document with the Fulton County clerk on Tuesday morning. The injunction is active. If you try to enforce Julian's debt, I will freeze your accounts. I will stall your Peachtree commercial acquisition until your institutional investors abandon you. You will authorize the cancellation of this debt right now, or I will burn this entire company to the ground." I watched him from the head of the table. He resembled a trapped predator chewing through its own leg to escape a snare, oblivious to the fact that the snare was already suspended over a sheer drop. He clung to the fabricated paperwork because it represented his final illusion of control. He truly believed a piece of counterfeit parchment could hold my empire hostage. Victoria moved. She did not rush. She took a slow, measured step away from the presentation screen, the sunlight catching the sharp tailoring of her charcoal suit. She projected the lethal, icy composure she honed during her years dismantling corporate fraudsters in Boston courtrooms. She approached the table and looked down at the forged document. "Sterling, you are operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of jurisdictional law," Victoria stated. Her tone carried no anger, only the clinical precision of a surgeon finalizing an amputation. Sterling bristled, planting his hands on the table. "It is a binding civil contract. My signature is on it." "Your signature is indeed on it," Victoria agreed, her dark eyes rising to meet his terrified gaze, along with an expired notary seal and a fictitious execution date. "You assumed the county clerk was merely a filing cabinet. You thought you could submit a crude internet template, secure a temporary injunction, and extort your son before anyone scrutinized the formatting. You treated the judicial system like a country club suggestion box." She paused, letting the silence ring in his ears. "Submitting a fabricated legal instrument to a government entity with the intent to secure financial gain is not a civil nuisance," she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is a felony. When you handed that folder to the clerk and swore to its authenticity, you triggered federal perjury statutes." Sterling swallowed hard, the color drained from his lips. You cannot prove I knew it was forged. It is a family dispute. The authorities do not care about a squabble over seed capital. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not mediate family squabbles, Victoria corrected him. They prosecute white-collar crime. We did not confront your forgery on Tuesday because we needed you to file it. We needed you to cross the threshold from a quiet liar into a documented federal criminal. You handed us the weapon, and we simply allowed you to pull the trigger. The air in the boardroom grew thin. Sterling stared at my wife, his jaw working silently as the legal reality of his actions crushed his final defense. He had orchestrated his own entrapment. But the trap possessed another layer, one that extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, centering my focus on the man who had discarded me 12 years ago. Your legal exposure is merely a symptom of your broader financial incompetence, Sterling, I said, drawing his horrified gaze back to me. To fund your country club dues, maintain your bespoke wardrobe, and keep up the facade of old money while Julian bled your savings dry, you required a continuous stream of capital. You took out a series of high-interest bridge loans over the past 8 months. Evelyn let out a sharp, ragged breath. She clutched her designer handbag against her chest, her knuckles turning bone white. She knew about the loans. Because you lacked liquid assets, you used your primary residence in Alpharetta as collateral. I continued outlining the anatomy of their ruin. You leveraged the estate to secure the cash. When you decided to file the fraudulent trust lawsuit against my firm, you needed a retainer for your attorneys and filing fees. You cross-collateralized those existing bridge loans, tying your suburban home directly to the outcome of your fabricated legal challenge. Sterling shook his head, a slow, mechanical movement of denial. The payments are current. The bank cannot touch the house. The bank is no longer involved, I informed him, delivering the final, fatal blow. The same anonymous proxy firm in Wyoming that purchased Julian's syndicate markers also swept up the secondary commercial paper in your suburban district. I bought your mortgages, Sterling. I own the debt on your estate. The realization struck him with physical force. He staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly, forcing him to grip the back of an ergonomic chair for support. Because you utilized the home as collateral to fund a federal fraud, you triggered the immediate default clauses embedded in the loan origination documents, I explained, keeping my tone devoid of any sympathetic fluctuation. The foreclosure paperwork was processed at 8 o'clock this morning. The locks on your Alpharetta estate are being changed right now. Evelyn collapsed into a nearby chair. The designer handbag slipped from her grasp, spilling a gold compact and a tube of lipstick onto the carpet. She did not cry. Her vocal cords were paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their destitution. They had arrived at my headquarters expecting to seize a real estate empire. They were leaving without a roof over their heads. Julian remained frozen near the edge of the room. He stared at the floor, unable to look at his parents. The golden child had catalyzed the destruction of his own family tree. His gambling, his cyber theft, and his cowardice had driven his father to commit perjury and forfeit their home. The toxic dynamic they nurtured for decades had finally consumed them from the inside out. There was no theatrical begging. There were no dramatic pleas for forgiveness or sudden epiphanies of parental guilt. The psychological ruin was profound and entirely silent. They were bankrupt, outmaneuvered, and trapped in a cage woven from their own greed. The suffocating terror of their new reality settled over them, heavy and inescapable. They stood in the pristine, sunlit boardroom, possessing nothing but the clothes on their backs. The legacy Sterling prized above his own son was reduced to a stack of forensic audits and 2 crumpled $20 bills resting on the mahogany table. I checked my platinum watch. The timing was flawless. The soft chime of the private executive elevator echoed in the quiet lobby. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid open with a muted hum. 5 figures stepped into the room. They did not wear tailored suits or carry designer briefcases. They wore dark windbreakers bearing the stark yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Caldwell led the team. His seasoned eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered documents, the terrified family, and the cold, unyielding architecture of my corporate fortress. Agent Caldwell stopped 3 feet away from Sterling. He held a thick stack of warrants printed on crisp, official letterhead. "Sterling Breyer," the agent announced, his voice carrying the uncompromising authority of the United States justice system. "You are under arrest for federal perjury and the submission of fraudulent legal instruments." A second agent moved toward the edge of the room, fixing his gaze on my half-brother. "Julian Breyer, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, cyber espionage, and international money laundering." The federal agents formed a perimeter surrounding the broken remnants of my bloodline. The physical trap snapped shut, mirroring the financial snare I had orchestrated over the past week. Sterling and Julian were corralled toward the center of the room, their hands restrained behind their backs with swift, practiced efficiency. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed off the glass walls, providing a definitive concluding note to their reign of arrogant entitlement. I stood at the head of the table observing the final harvest of their toxic seeds. They had gambled their freedom on a lie, and the House had collected the debt. The empire they tried to steal remained untouched, while their own kingdom was reduced to ash and federal indictments. The metallic ratcheting of steel cuffs finalized the transaction. Special Agent Caldwell did not offer a gentle touch. He directed Sterling forward with a firm grip on the shoulder of his ruined silver suit. Julian followed, his head bowed, his designer loafers shuffling a slow, defeated rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. The federal escorts moved with practiced synchronization, forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around their targets. Evelyn remained in her chair, a hollow statue drained of life. She watched her husband and her golden child being marched toward the heavy glass doors. She made no sound. The socialite who thrived on country club whispers and curated appearances was reduced to a silent witness of her own destitution. A junior agent lingered behind, murmuring instructions regarding her immediate departure from the premises. She possessed no transportation, no home to return to, and no credit cards that would clear a taxi fare. She was a ghost haunting the perimeter of my fortress, rendered invisible by her sudden poverty. The boardroom doors slid open. The procession stepped out into the sleek, quiet lobby. I remained at the head of the mahogany table, my posture relaxed. I watched them walk away. There was no theatrical gloating or raised voice on my part. True power does not require an audience or a parade. It requires execution. I glanced at the digital calendar displayed on my secondary monitor. October the 12th. The symmetry of the date settled over the room like a perfectly balanced ledger. Exactly 12 years ago, on this very day, Sterling had stood in the foyer of his sprawling suburban estate, handing me a pair of crumpled $20 bills. He had calculated the cost of my existence and deemed me a poor investment. He evicted a 17-year-old boy into a freezing autumn storm to preserve his wealth for Julian. I remembered the distinct smell of the wet asphalt that night. I remembered the piercing cold seeping through my thin jacket as I walked miles in the dark, clutching the only capital I possessed. Today, on the precise anniversary of my banishment, the mathematics of our relationship reached their final sum. Sterling stepped into the glaring Atlanta sunlight as a federal suspect, stripped of his dignity, his liberty, and his legacy. The universe rarely offers such pristine accounting, but I had engineered the margins myself. The 2 faded notes rested flat on the gleaming wood of my desk. They were no longer a symbol of my rejection. They were the receipt of his purchase. He bought his own ruin for $40, and the interest had accrued over a decade. I walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Georgian sun bathed the financial district in a harsh, unforgiving light. Far below, the federal convoy merged into the heavy city traffic, the black SUVs blending seamlessly into the flow of commerce. My pulse maintained a steady, resting rhythm. I felt no lingering sorrow for the men confined in the back of those vehicles. The dark void they carved into my chest 12 years ago was finally sealed. My empire stood secure. The hostile audit they attempted to leverage against my firm merely served to stress test my defenses. The false media narratives and the forged legal instruments shattered against the unyielding architecture I had constructed. The attack did not diminish my standing. It solidified my reputation among the institutional investors who were already calling my private line, having observed the rapid surgical dismantling of a hostile threat. Vanguard Institutional Holdings would return to the negotiating table by tomorrow morning, eager to participate in the Peachtree acquisition now that the legal clouds were forcefully scattered. My fortress was impenetrable. Victoria approached the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with me, the reflection of the cityscape mirrored in her dark eyes. We had navigated the tempest together, our partnership forged tighter by the friction of the conflict. She did not need to ask how I felt. The quiet stillness in the boardroom conveyed the depth of our triumph. The parasite was excised from the host. We turned back to the mahogany table. The scattered remnants of Sterling's false empire lay spread across the surface. While the federal agents had confiscated the primary digital devices and the forged trust document, Victoria retained the secondary financial portfolios generated during our proxy acquisition of the illicit debt. She began sorting the physical documents, organizing the ledgers into pristine stacks for our internal compliance archives. Her hands paused over a faded, yellowed file folder buried beneath the recent property assessments. Victoria frowned, a rare expression of genuine curiosity breaking her stoic facade. She opened the brittle cardboard cover, her eyes scanning the dense, typewritten text. The document was old, predating Julian's birth, predating my own eviction. It was a corporate charter. Milo, Victoria murmured, her Boston accent clipping the edges of the silence. I stepped away from the window and walked to her side. I looked down at the aged parchment. When we acquired the secondary commercial paper tied to your father's suburban estate, we swept up his entire debt history, she explained, her index finger tracing a line of faded ink. I assumed the older files were standard revolving credit lines or closed mortgages, but this specific ledger is an active corporate charter for a holding entity named Vanguard Apex. It was established 30 years ago. I studied the organizational chart. The entity was a shell company buried beneath layers of archaic legal protection. That alone was not unusual for men like Sterling, who frequently attempted to shield assets from taxation. But the names listed under the primary shareholder registry caught my attention, sending a sudden, sharp chill through the room. Sterling was listed as a minority proxy. The majority stakeholders were not family members or obscure business partners. The names printed on the charter belonged to a sitting state senator, a prominent Fulton County Superior Court judge, and the current commissioner of the Atlanta Zoning Board. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sterling was not merely a desperate father trying to cover his son's gambling debts. 3 decades ago, he acted as a financial conduit for the political elite of Georgia. He was holding a dormant shadow ledger, connecting the highest levels of local government to undisclosed corporate funds. He did not leverage the suburban house just to pay his country club dues. Victoria realized, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He was using the estate to collateralize a slush fund for the politicians who control this city. By foreclosing on that property, you did not just seize his home. You seized the vault containing their secrets. The air in the boardroom crackled with a new, volatile energy. The family dispute was resolved, but the war had just expanded. By dismantling my father, I had unwittingly kicked open the door to a sprawling, entrenched syndicate of political corruption. The men listed on that charter would not surrender their hidden wealth quietly. They possessed the power to rewrite laws, revoke licenses, and summon municipal armies. I looked at the crumpled $40 resting on the table, then up at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city was no longer just a backdrop for my personal vindication. It was a vast, hostile theater of operations. The elite architects of Georgia thought their secrets were safe in the hands of a weak, arrogant patriarch. They were about to discover that a forensic auditor now held the keys to their kingdom. I picked up the 30-year-old charter. Let us see how deep the rot goes, I said, the cold, analytical thrill waking up inside my chest once more. There is a profound and terrifying truth woven into the fabric of the American family dynamic. The children we raise ultimately become the architects of our final days. In the chilling saga of Milo Breyer and the spectacular collapse of his bloodline, we witnessed a masterclass in the devastating consequences of transactional parenting. When a father looks at a 17-year-old boy, calculates his worth, and hands him 2 crumpled $20 bills as a severance package, he is not merely closing a front door. He is planting a seed of destruction that will inevitably blossom. In the pursuit of the American dream, the traditional family structure is often heralded as the bedrock of success. It is meant to be an unbreakable sanctuary, a cornerstone of culture, where unconditional love serves as the ultimate safety net. But what happens when that sanctuary is treated like a corporate ledger? What happens when parents like Sterling and Evelyn measure the value of their offspring through the distorted lens of convenience, status, and favoritism? The story of the Breyer family serves as a dark mirror, reflecting the catastrophic fallout of stripping emotional awareness, honesty, and fundamental fairness from the sacred duty of raising a child. At the heart of this ruin lies the tragedy of the golden child. In modern society, we place immense pressure on projecting success, frequently conflating material wealth with genuine character. Sterling and Evelyn poured their resources, their adoration, and their fragile legacy into Julian. They shielded him from consequence. They built a world where his every whim was catered to, where failure was always someone else's fault, and where money was utilized as a bandage for a profound lack of guiding discipline. This is the insidious danger of raising a child without boundaries or moral framework. By refusing to hold Julian accountable, by insulating him from the harsh but necessary lessons of integrity and hard work, they did not empower him. They crippled him. Julian's descent into illicit gambling, offshore syndicates, and ultimately federal wire fraud was not an anomaly. It was the predictable destination of a boy raised to believe the rules of society simply did not apply to his bloodline. True parenting requires the courage to let a child fall, to teach them how to navigate failure with honesty. When we remove accountability, we replace emotional resilience with a hollow, fragile arrogance. Julian was handed the keys to an empire, but because he possessed no internal compass, he traded his kingdom for the fleeting thrill of a shadow market. He became a monster of his parents' own making, a gilded cage that eventually trapped them all. Conversely, we must examine the crucible that forged Milo. Cast out into the freezing rain with nothing but $40 and the crushing weight of his own family's rejection, Milo was forced to build his own foundation. In healthy family structures, the home is meant to be a launching pad, not a place of exile. Yet the resilience Milo developed is a testament to the indomitable human spirit. He learned that his worth was not dictated by the people who abandoned him. He learned to rely on his own intellect, forging an empire out of sheer determination. However, we must ask ourselves, at what cost does this resilience come? Milo built a financial fortress, a towering real estate consultancy constructed on cold logic and impenetrable borders. But the armor required to survive such a profound betrayal leaves permanent, unseen scars. The tragedy of Milo's triumph is that his strength had to be fueled by a frozen heart. He learned to view the world through the same clinical, transactional lens his father utilized, merely perfecting the art until he became the apex predator. This is the hidden cost of emotional neglect. When parents fail to provide a foundation of fairness and emotional warmth, children will build their own walls. And sometimes those walls are made of unyielding, unforgiving ice. Milo became the judge, jury, and executioner, wielding silence and forensic audits with terrifying precision, forever alienated from the warmth of a true family bond. The climax within the glass-walled boardroom is not just a tale of corporate revenge. It is a profound parable about the long-term harvest of our parenting choices. The consequences of our actions always come home to roost. Sterling and Evelyn stood in the epicenter of their ruined legacy, stripped of their wealth, their home, and their freedom, looking into the cold eyes of the son they threw away. They expected mercy from a boy they had shown none. They demanded familial loyalty after spending a decade proving that to them, blood was merely a commodity to be traded on the open market. This is the ultimate lesson in family responsibility and long-term guidance. You cannot sow seeds of betrayal, deceit, and overt favoritism and expect to harvest loyalty, compassion, and salvation in your twilight years. Parenting is the longest game we play. The guidance we offer, the honesty we model, and the fairness we practice are the bricks that build the future. When we substitute genuine emotional connection with superficial status, we are building a house on sand, waiting for the tide to wash it away. The Breyer family's downfall is a stark reminder that the energy we pour into our children will eventually return to us, amplified by time. If you found yourself captivated by this intricate web of betrayal and justice, and if you believe that the choices we make today echo loudly into our tomorrows, make sure to subscribe and follow the Linda Vengeance channel for more stories that explore the dark, complex, and deeply satisfying corners of human nature and retribution. As the federal vehicles pulled away from that high-rise carrying the ashes of a broken dynasty into the glaring Atlanta sun, we are left with a lingering, uncomfortable silence. Look at the people sitting across from you at your own dinner table. Consider the words you speak, the boundaries you enforce, and the silent lessons you are teaching them every single day. We are all building a legacy, one interaction at a time. The real question is, when the years have passed and the ledger of your life is finally audited, will you be met with the open arms of a family who loves you? Or will you find yourself staring across a cold mahogany table, waiting to pay a debt you never knew you owed?